pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let Frank and Benny get the senior start time.
Please call the roll.
Councilmember Dominguez.
Here.
Hart. Hotchkiss. Murillo.
Here.
Rouse.
Here.
White. Mayor Snyder.
Here, and I believe we have some stragglers on their way. I don't see any public comment for items not on the agenda, so we'll close that. And it looks like Waterfront is first. Mr. Bossi, Mr. Reedman, good morning.
Good morning, Madam Mayor, council members. Scott Reedman, Waterfront Director. We're here to do our FY18 budget for the Waterfront Department. Just by way of a quick outline, even though we submitted a 2-year budget, we're just focusing on 2018. So we'll have some slides on revenue assumptions, fee adjustments, which we presented to the Finance Committee last week. Expenditures, we'll go over the capital program, and we have a dredge issue that's come up that Carl will talk about. And then we'll go through our performance objectives. So in terms of personnel, we have 47 now permanent staff. We hadn't added anybody in many years, but last year we added on an extra accounting assistant position for a total of 3. So we have 4 managers, 5 supervisors. We're only at 8 Harbor Patrol officers right now. We're short 2. We're in the middle of a recruitment right now, and we've had a good turnout on that recruitment, so they're going through the tests and so forth. And we have 28 general employees, and each of our divisions also uses hourly employees, Harbor Patrol, facilities, and parking, particularly parking. So in terms of the waterfront organization, it's 3 divisions. The Business Services Division is headed up by Brian Bossi, and that oversees the property management function, which is significant at Waterfront, accounting and financial management, budgeting, and then also parking services, which is growing more and more significant as a revenue generator at Waterfront. Mick oversees the Harbor Operations Division, and that consists of Harbor Patrol and Marina Management, with 10 sworn officers in patrol and a supervisor. And then Carl oversees the Facilities Division, which includes maintenance like you'd expect, but also our capital, all of our capital projects. Waterfront is responsible for funding and carrying out as well.
Good morning, council members. I'll go through the numbers with you here today, and just to get you situated, you'll see in the lower right-hand corner of the upcoming slides the page number in which these numbers refer back to. So if you want to follow along or if you have questions, you can refer back to that page number in your budget document. As far as waterfront expenditures are concerned, we're looking at about just shy of $13.8 million in operating expenditures. And I'll run through these really briefly. We'll go in a clockwise manner. Up in your upper right, we start with our admin support and community relations program, and that occupies about 18.4% of our budget. Our property management, which deals with approximately 65 leases, all our tenants, both in the harbor as well as the wharf. Our financial management program, which deals with obviously financial management. And I do want to say that the 2 folks who are the primary employees in that program, Dave Dory and Damian Goodall, do an amazing job and help us so much with these presentations and putting our numbers together. I can't thank them enough. Then we have parking services, as Scott said, continuing to get bigger and bigger as a revenue source for the waterfront. We have our Harbor Patrol operations. Again, technically, we should be at 10 sworn officers. We're working on that right now. We're down to 8 as well as the supervisor. Our Marina Management program, those folks work with our 1,143 slips, and that's their primary function, and serving visitors coming in and out of the harbor as well, boaters. And then we have our facility maintenance program, the biggest slice of the pie, if you will. As you can imagine, being down on the ocean, both at the wharf and the harbor, it's a tremendous work effort every day to keep everything up and running. Then we have our facilities design and capital program, and that's under Carl, and that focuses on our capital programs and annually. So moving forward in your budget document, way to the back where the waterfront is listed, page G458, this is another way to sum up our proposed expenditures for fiscal year 2018. You'll see the descriptions of the items on the left-hand column, our fiscal year 17 amended budget, our fiscal year projected budget, where we think we're going to end up, and then what we're recommending as far as our fiscal year 18 budget. You also see a change from the fiscal year 17 amended budget to 18, so that gives you an idea of the dollars and cents of the change, as well as on the far right, the percentage change from the amended budget, fiscal year 17 amended budget, to the fiscal year 18. So as far as salaries and benefits are concerned, you'll see a small increase there with about 3%. Moving to supplies and services, you'll see an 11% increase, and that supplies and services in this particular, the way it's described, includes our allocated costs. So we've had a big increase in fiscal year 18 as far as our insurance premiums are concerned and our overhead allocations. We also have a number of expenditures, one-time expenditures for Harbor Patrol needs new radios. That's an important piece of communication to keep our Harbor Patrol up and running. We also have increases to our Work Inc. contract, and those are the folks who work 7 days a week down at the waterfront. There are cerebral palsy, United Cerebral Palsy Group Center down in Carpinteria, and they're a great group of folks who do a wonderful job keeping our restrooms and public areas very clean. Next, you'll see our capital equipment. You'll see I missed special projects. You'll see a slight decrease there. Special projects has to do with our 4th of July contract. That's for the fireworks, obviously, and that also includes our Parade of Lights fireworks. It also includes our portion, the waterfront's portion of the Waterfront Shuttle program, as well as we fund about 62% of the lifeguards. So those three things make up our special projects. As far as capital equipment is concerned, you'll see a significant decrease, albeit only $30,000 in the big picture, and that was fiscal year 17. We purchased a new marina management system to make it more user-friendly as far as our slip holders as well as our tenants are concerned. Our debt service remains pretty static, and that's just our various bonds. Our non-capital equipment down significantly, and that primarily has to do with one-time purchases in fiscal year 17. We had Harbor Patrol needed new weapons because they were outdated. We also had to bring up to code our self-contained breathing apparatus, which is what our Harbor Patrol uses for fires. And we also in the process of installing new security cameras in our parking kiosks. So those were all one-time expenses in fiscal year 17, which drop off, as you can see, as far as 18. Our transfers out, the majority of that $46,000 was for the new agenda management system, and we don't anticipate any type of transfers out in fiscal year 18. So overall, as you can see, through $13,791,000, it's about a 3% increase over the fiscal year 2017 amended budget. As far as revenues are concerned, keep that $13.7 million in your head. Our revenues were estimated at $14,869,000. So obviously our revenue is above our expenditures. That's a good place to be. We're happy with that. Working through our different revenue categories, you'll see that our leases, as far as commercial are concerned, occupy about 11.9% of that pie. That's commercial both in the harbor and the wharf. Below that, you'll see our leases food. Again, that includes both the harbor as well as the wharf. So everything from Brophy Brothers and Sushi Go-Go out to Char West on the wharf and everything in between. Our leases other are some of our smaller leases, the Yacht Club, UCSB Sailing Center, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA offices that we house down in the harbor, our Clean Seas. So it's some of our smaller but nonetheless very important leases that we have. Our interest income, those numbers are generated by our finance department. Our parking fees occupy about 20%, as we said. That seems to be increasing every year. and that's about $2.9 million, just shy of $3 million. Our slip rentals, again, that's for the 1,143 slips we have in our 4 marinas. Our visitor fees, these are fees, people coming in and out of the harbor, sailing up or down the coast. We have almost a hotel component, I guess you could say, down at the harbor where people are coming in and out. We also have our slip transfer fees, so when slips change hands, there's a fee involved, and that's about total's about $830,000, what we're projecting for 18. And then we have our live aboard fees. We have approximately 90 different live aboards in the harbor. They pay $150 a month for that privilege of living in the harbor. And then you'll see at the top our miscellaneous, quite a large miscellaneous, and the major component of that is our cruise ship revenue. We also have in there some of our other smaller items, key cards, permits for Cat Beach and West Beach, and classroom rentals. So, but again, the overwhelming majority of our miscellaneous component is the cruise ship revenues that we see. Shifting again towards the back of your budget binder, page G458, if you're following along. This breaks it down into only 4 categories, a little bit easier to digest. On the left, you'll see our fees, services, and charges, interest income, lease income, and then our other revenue. So again, fiscal year 17 amended, what we're projecting for 17, what we're recommending for 18, and then again, the change both in dollar figures as well as percentage. So fees, services, and charges, you'll see about a 3% increase there, what we're proposing. That primarily has to do with our fee changes that I'll be discussing here in a minute. Our interest income, again, given by our finance department, looks to go up by about 19%, which is nice. We'll take it. Our lease income, again, this includes both commercial and food leases from both the harbor and the waterfront, looking at a nice little increase of 5%. We continue to grow in that area. We're hopeful that the bridge opening down on Cabrillo, as well as a lot of those projects in Lower State Street coming online, will again help people to get out to the wharf a little bit easier and make their way over to the harbor as well. And then again, our other revenue, this, if you were to flip back to the last page, this is kind of our miscellaneous revenue as well. You'll see a big decrease, 38%, about $234,000. Again, this includes our cruise ship revenue, and I should let you know that normally we see between 27 and 29 cruise ships a year. Next year, it is anticipated that we're going to have 21 cruise ships, so number one, a fewer amount of cruise ships, but also these cruise ships are smaller in size, so fewer passengers, and that's where we receive our revenues based on the passenger count. I can let you know that we are working, and we have worked and we continue to work with Visit Santa Barbara and making our presence known with our cruise line folks and keeping Santa Barbara on the radar. We're assured that this is not a permanent thing. What they're doing is we've had some consolidation in the cruise ship industry, and so they're repositioning some of their ships throughout the world, and so we're kind of in that phase. This is a transition year, but we are going to continue to be even more active with our cruise ship folks and make sure they keep Santa Barbara on their radar. So overall, as far as revenues are concerned, a slight 2% increase, even with the cruise ship revenue declining significantly. As far as proposed fees, we are proposing a slip rental fee, a 2% increase. This is a requirement of our Division of Boating and Waterways loan, and that, just again, that Division of Boating and Waterways loan has helped fund the first 7 phases of our Marina One project. And you'll see also our slip transfer fee, and that we're proposing a 25-foot increase, which will bring that to $450 per foot when a slip transfers. I should let you know that this does not include the 20, 25, 28, or 30-foot slips, as well as designated commercial slips. Those were all frozen in previous years at certain levels, so the 2% increase will just affect basically 35 and above. As far as the question, well, what does 2% look like? Here's what it looks like. We took a sampling of some of our slip lengths, everything from 20 to 60 foot, which is basically the majority of the harbor. And what that 2% does as a change per foot. So for a 20-foot slip, that's 17 cents per foot change. Overall, it's about a $3.44 per month addition to their monthly slip fee. And that goes all the way up to the 60-footers, which you'll see just shy of $15 increase in their monthly slip fee. And I'm going to turn it over to Carl Treiberg, who will talk about our capital program.
Madam Mayor and council members, we continue to invest heavily in our infrastructure at the waterfront. We pay for our capital program with surplus revenues above policy. And we also have the Capital Reserve or Harbor Preservation Fund, which is codified in the municipal code.
I don't think your mic's on.
I'm sorry. In the municipal code, we're required to keep the Harbor Preservation Fund at between $2 million and $5 million a year. So when we do our long-term cash flow models, we kind of look at the outlying year to make sure we maintain that minimum for the municipal code. Examples of some projects we have proposed for fiscal year 2018. The most important one, the largest one, is the final phase of the Marina One replacement project. It's an 8-phase project. We started in 2009. It's been funded with a loan from the State Parks Department Division of Boating and Waterways. We secured $14 million. It's a home equity line of credit type loan where we only borrow what we need, which has been nice phasing this project, because when we borrow just a little bit at a time, it's just a nominal increase annually in slip fees to help pay for it, as opposed to all $14 million at once, and the debt service on that would be rather significant. So it's worked out quite well for us, and we're going to be really pleased when it's done. Another example of our investment, our infrastructure, is out on Stearns Wharf. We just increased our Stearns Wharf timber and pile replacement budget from $400,000 to $425,000 a year, and that pays for all the piles and all the components of the heavy timber that hold the wharf up. We installed a pedestrian counter out there a couple of years ago, and in 2016 we had over 1 million pedestrians out on the wharf, over 250,000 vehicles, so it really gets a lot of use, and maintaining the structural integrity of that facility is important. We have a waterline replacement project out there. It's new for us and unique. The wharf was reopened in 1980 with all new utilities, and when you look underneath the wharf these days, you can tell the 30-year-old water line that's exposed to the waves and the marine environment don't look so good anymore. So this is a pretty big project. We've been working with our Public Works Engineering Division, designing something, and we're going to replace all the laterals this year, and a few years out we'll replace the main line, just to make sure that most important utility is sound and intact to service all those people who are out there. The remaining projects are typical examples of what we do in the waterfront, repowering harbor patrol vessels, working on handrails, sidewalk repairs. Marina 2 restroom remodel will be the last landside remodel we've done in the last 10 years to bring everything up to code, and that's a big emphasis we have at the waterfront. Next slide, please. A project that is not included on that list that we may be coming back to council for is some chronic shoaling we've had off West Beach. West Beach is a quiet water area that's within the wave shadow of the harbor and enjoyed by many people in small boats, kayaks, stand-up paddleboards. And over the years, about every 10 years, it shoals up, and we've managed to remove that sediment with our own funds, with grant funds, and in working with the county, a lot of that sand's made it up to Goleta Beach to deal with their erosion. Councilmember Harp represents the city on a joint powers agency known as BEACON, which is an acronym for the Beach Erosion Authority for Control and Nourishment. And we, BEACON, on our behalf, along with the City of Ventura and Channel Islands Harbor, submitted a multi-million-dollar grant application to the Division of Boating and Waterways to dredge out these areas and do some additional beach nourishment. And unfortunately, that grant just got denied. We just found out last week. And it's a pretty big number for us. It's about 80,000 cubic yards. It's outside the federal channel, so no federal funds are available to dredge that. And the cost to remove that is about $600,000 if we piggyback on the Corps' dredging contract, which we think we can do. The problem is we could reapply and possibly get some funding in 2020, but that would allow for this less than desirable shoaling condition to persist for quite a few more years. And it's for any boater going into the harbor, the moment you wander outside of the channel, you're going to run aground. It's a pretty large area where a lot of people enjoy sailing small boats, so we're going to think seriously and work with our finance department in maybe coming back to council in the fall to suggest appropriating enough funds to dredge it ourselves. We've done it before. We've tried to take advantage of grant opportunities, but the grant conditions for the Division of Voting Waterways are rather stringent. They would only pay for a portion of half of that. They only deal with the beach nourishment component, not the dredging component, which seems a little odd. You can't have one without the other. But it's a pretty big project for us, so like I said, we may be coming back to you with that. And when Brian's done, I'd be happy to answer any questions about any of the details of our capital project program.
Okay, looking at some key performance measures that we've pulled out of the budget document. First, you'll see continue a comprehensive public information and community relations program. And again, I note the page number here. This has definitely been something we've been focused on over the past few years. Dominique Samario, our admin analyst, has really brought us into the current day and times. We have Twitter, we have Instagram, we're on Facebook. So if you're looking to follow us, you can at SB Waterfront, so have at it. And this also includes our communications as far as our quarterly newsletter, which is dock lines. We do a lot of PR with our tenants as far as July 4th is concerned and different activities we may have in and outside the harbor, whether it be the Harbor and Seafood Festival or July 4th, or things such as Safety Day out on the wharf, which is organized by our Wharf Merchants Association. Next, maintain accurate sales and reporting by auditing 25% of our percentage rent leases annually. This is something we work with an outside CPA firm who comes in and is very familiar with our leases and our programs. And we generally do revenue examinations on 6 to 7 of our percentage rent leases annually. And they do a wonderful job for us, and it just keeps everybody up to snuff. And we work with our tenants to make sure everything's okay. Also, a very important one is achieve an average of 80 training hours for our harbor patrol officers. That's going to be even more important as we move forward and hopefully have 2 new officers on. We're looking at sometime in the fall if everything works out. It's a lengthy process, but a very important one. Next, for facilities maintenance, they'll be replacing 10 Marina Fingers in Marina 4. A very large undertaking, but they do wonderful work, and it's nice to keep that in-house. Also, as Carl mentioned, this is a huge accomplishment, completing Phase 8 of the Marina 1 replacement program, the final phase of the Marina 1 program, and then we're going to start again. No, I'm just kidding, Carl. But we're happy to finally have this done. It's worked out really well. If any of you have been down there, the marinas that have been completed, the fingers that have been completed are amazing. And then finally, also, as Carl mentioned, continue to work with the Army Corps of Engineers to ensure that our channel is open. That's a very important part of the Santa Barbara Harbor and something we have a really good working relationship with the Army Corps, and we hope to continue that as we move into the future. Lastly, we took this over the past couple of months to our Harbor Commission, and at their April 20th meeting, they moved forward a recommendation to City Council for approval of the Waterfront Department's proposed fiscal year 2018 budget. And that concludes our presentation, and we're all here to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. So, Ms. Murillo.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you. So regarding the cruise ships, so you're saying, is there a cap on how many can come? Because I talked to somebody who said she thought 45 were coming this year, and that's not what you said. So, see, people don't know, right?
Madam Mayor, Council Member Murillo, there is no hard and fast cap, but typically, we wouldn't approve over, say, 30. We would never do that many. So we try to keep it between Labor Day and Memorial Day, and not so much on the weekends. No more than 2 ships back to back, so we don't have 3 in a row. We try and keep the impacts down and keep it to the shoulder months and so forth. But I don't think we've ever exceeded 28 ships in a season.
So you say there's a minimal amount that comes on the weekend. That was another thing. So I talked to somebody who doesn't like the cruise ship, so that's why I'm asking the questions. No offense, but
No,
we hear everything.
Well, I'm sure, Councilmember Maria, we minimize them on the weekends, but actually the Parks and Recreation art show loves them on the weekends, and they'll move that when there's one on a Saturday. They'll move the Sunday show to Saturday to coincide with the cruise ships. So we've had pressure from both sides of that issue.
I know pressure from both sides. Yeah. Okay. So just let me tell you what I heard. The complaint too was that when they come in, the passengers, they sort of dominate that whole area, and it disrupts traffic. And I see the tents there or the canopies, and so there is some bustling there to pick them up and take them places on the curb. Is that what happens?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Rio, that's correct. We set up, we do close one lane of Cabrillo Boulevard along that section, so the red trolleys can come in. Waterfront funds 4 booster shuttles from MTD, little shuttles, so the folks can get on and go straight downtown. Put up the canopies, so some of them are an elderly demographic or an older demographic, and we don't want them just broiling in the sun while they're waiting to get on back onto the ship and so forth. But what we're really proud of is the hospitality booth, and you're right, there is a lot of activity right there along Cabrillo. We have crossing guards so that where they cross the beachway, they hold the folks back so they don't get run over by a Surrey or a bicycle or something, rollerblader or something. So there's a lot that goes into it security-wise and public outreach-wise. In the hospitality booth, they have flyers for any business that wants to have a business card or a flyer down there. So yeah, it's bustling, but it's a fun kind of bustle.
Okay. Well, I'll go down and take a look myself. But when people, for environmental reasons, or they're worried about the cruise ships, and so then they get critical about all the different aspects. But if I can ask about you group it into the miscellaneous category, if it could be pulled out, then I know that we're always trying to tell people that the cruise ships do generate some revenue for the city, and then here they are, visiting us, and they're not driving in a car to come here, so there's some, value to that. So it's just a thought, Mr. Bossi, if you're doing your math to pull it out so we can have a cruise ship category, might be helpful. And then just because I don't want to be negative, so I'm not getting any complaints anymore about the people who live there. I guess it's just that one fellow who would complain about parking. And anyway, I haven't had any complaints from the liveaboards. So I just want you to know, yay, you're making them happy, or at least that one fellow. And then I really wanted to thank you, Director Reedman, for your participation in the effort to find daytime parking spots for people who live in their RVs. And the city of Santa Barbara has really stepped up to provide, a few spots here and there as we move forward with our oversized vehicle ordinance. Really, you sat through those meetings. You were there listening to people who live in their RVs. Just such a gentleman. Thank you. It was hard. It was really a really difficult process. And, you were cheerful and nice, and they were mad. Some of them were mad because things have changed on the waterfront and their ability to park down there. And so I just wanted to say thanks. And then maybe to Mr. Casey, this one, I don't see a report about shoreline habitat. Does that come through the Creeks Division, or what I'm saying, a focus on the beach and the outfalls and the shoreline as natural habitat? I wonder how we can get more information about that in general.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Murillo, there isn't a budget program that deals with that. It is managed by different entities. The Waterfront Department plays some role. Parks and Recreation and the Creeks Division plays another role. So I don't know specifically about what you're requesting for, but we can give you information. We gave you a thorough presentation on the bird refuge and kind of the immediate area around the bird refuge and kind of some long-term planning that's going on there.
I just know that, Audubon does some bird counts down there. I think our residents would be interested in knowing the birds and the bees part of it down there. So,
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Murillo, parks and the waterfront, we are required to conduct bird surveys on a regular basis for the
Really?
different activities, beach grooming, whatever activity
beach
it is.
grooming, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so we do have a pretty good inventory or surveys, history of surveys for sensitive species and whatnot and how to avoid them. And we work with UCSB on a recent study for sea level rise impacts to sensitive ecosystems, the beaches
Awesome.
and the estuaries.
One
so we
slide.
stay involved, but it's kind of in conjunction with other organizations.
Okay, I imagine, right? And all the regulatory agencies are all over us on what we do down there. So just next time, if we could have one slide that talks about nature. Thank you.
If I may just jump in for one more thing, Mick reminds me, how could I forget, about our Clean Marina program that we do within the harbor that consists of a whole series of programs in terms of water testing and, keeping care of the habitat both within the harbor and outside the harbor. And just last week at Harbor Commission, we had Channel Islands Wildlife Marine Institute do a presentation on the domoic acid poisoning issue that's going on with the sea lions and so forth. And we work very closely with them on protecting them and treating the ones that are sick and so forth. So we're very involved in that stuff.
Well, we'd love to hear about that. I mean, the budget hearing is your opportunity to show off all of that work too. So thank you.
Mr. Hart?
Yeah, I have a similar kind of question. Mr. Triberg mentioned that I attend the Beacon board meetings as the city's representative, and we had a presentation just last week from the folks at the U.S. Geological Survey talking about sea level rise, and the level of sophistication of the modeling that's involved in that work has gotten tremendously more focused and precise and granular, and it's very sobering, and it's seeing the charts that show potential sea level rise in the waterfront area, and then also at the airport too. So I think I'm going to forewarn the airport folks that I have a question about that too. What planning are you doing long range to address that? Your department is ground zero for those impacts, and you have obviously thought about this and are engaged on this issue, and I just want to know what your thoughts are and your plans are looking forward.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Hart, I'm representing the waterfront with working with the planning department on the local coastal program update. They've done the vulnerability assessment, and the next step, well, I think you've been aware, they just got some grant funds from the Coastal Commission to work on a financial analysis and an impact analysis and adaptation strategies. So the adaptation strategies are really the key as to how we plan into the future. We've had some preliminary discussions with the Coastal Commission. They like harbors. They want the harbor to stay, which means in the long range that we'll probably propose out into the future capital improvements associated with making the breakwater a little higher and dealing with that sea level rise component, which is good. But it's going to be really interesting to work on the adaptation plan because we're not at the very forefront of this, but we're out front. So there's not a lot of examples to draw from. So I'm curious as to just exactly what we'll propose and how much it'll cost and how we can prepare for that.
So at this stage, you're not beginning to think about the financial consequences of that and putting money aside for that. You need to see a list that demonstrates the exact cost, or not the exact cost, but the order of magnitude cost involved in what you're talking about in order to develop a financial model to begin to prepay some of those costs. Because it does seem like the amount of money we're talking about is orders of magnitude more expensive than what you've been doing, and having a revenue stream that adjusts to that is probably we need to get the money coming in sooner than later rather than waiting to have a bill that's too expensive to afford. And I think there's a tension. The waterfront department is so well managed and you do a great job, but there probably needs to be additional fees to address this going forward, or there just isn't going to be the ability to finance that. And it's one of those things where we probably need to start raising fees higher than what we have historically done, because that model fit a maintenance capital investment strategy. This kind of significant upgrade in infrastructure investment is outside that financial model that you have today, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong about those kind of basic assumptions.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Hart, you're spot on. You're exactly right. These would be big ticket items out into the future. We don't know what they are yet. The first step with this financial impact analysis that we've hired, the city's going to hire a fellow from Cal State San Francisco to work on. Dr. Phil King. He's done some work for Beacon in the past. And the goal is to quantify the financial impact associated with sea level rise along the coast. So we'll have some sense for where we want to invest, where we need to invest, and where we can deal with other things, other approaches, managed retreat, some other lower cost things. So it'll hopefully help us focus on what sort of infrastructure we'll need to develop and enhance and get some sense of what those costs are. Just by way of example, it took decades to plan the harbor. It didn't just happen overnight. It took many decades, people working together. So the sea level rise infrastructure improvements would be something along those lines, looking out decades into the future. But that's going to be an interesting discussion to have.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, and that is exactly my concern. Is that seeing these charts showing 2050 sea level rise at relatively modest assumptions about greenhouse gas emission increasing over time, is we're getting to where decades is not unreasonable today. This is 2050 stuff that we saw at Beacon, and I appreciate that you're thinking ahead and planning ahead. So thank you.
Mr. Rouse?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Bossy, so the BAPs, the business activity permits, are in the property management part of your management? Is that correct?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Ross, that's correct.
Okay. And I don't know if it break out a revenue part of that or not, but it's probably not that significant in the scope of the big. Just kind of more of a curiosity, because I know there are the active BAPs and there's people that try to sneak in and do work on the side, and it's sometimes a controversy down there.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Rouse, that's exactly correct. The business activity permit program was started back in the early 70s, and the main reason was to keep the harbor a safe place for everybody. So what we do is folks who don't have an actual brick and mortar facility down in the harbor, but are an important part of the harbor, whether they're varnishers or maybe they work on motors, maybe they clean boats, the folks who scrub the bottom of the boats, all those folks end up getting a business activity permit. And I believe it's $25 a year. So yes, you're right. It's not a huge revenue source. But as part of that process, what we do is we make sure they have the appropriate insurance to work, because we don't want people out working on these boats. Something can happen, a boat catches fire, or maybe somebody gets hurt. We want those folks to be covered. So that's an important part of the BAP program, probably the main component of that program. So we know who's coming in and out of the different marinas. And yes, we do find people who are trying to work on boats who don't have our business activity permit. Some of them just don't know, so we educate them. Others are knowingly violating that process, so we try and get them to, first of all, we remove them from the marinas and explain the program with the hopes that they then come in and get a business activity permit. And I think our biggest source of that are our current BAP holders, who when they see somebody who they know is not a BAP holder, they'll let us know. So it's an important program that keeps the harbor safe.
And switching gears for a moment, the working contract, is that affected by things like minimum wage or living wage? How does that work?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Ross, that's exactly correct. It is impacted by minimum wage. So we've seen a number of increases that correspond to the state's increase in minimum wage over the last few years. And the increases for both 18 and 19 are just that, for the minimum wage increase.
Do you have to budget that into your other fee increases to cover that maintenance contract then?
Our fee increases end up paying for that parking revenues and things like that, but we don't specifically. I believe the impact this year is $30,000, and next year it's about $33,000, I believe. So it is paid for through some of our other revenue programs, but it's something that we can manage.
Okay, then last category is in parking. And this is significant because of all the activity and whatnot that's going on in the funk zone and what the future might look like. You have the parking fees down. Do you break out annual permits versus daily fees and hourly fees in terms of your revenue picture?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Rouse, yes, we do. So everything you see up here, we really get into the weeds. So yeah, we have every parking lot broken out. We have our permits broken out. and everything in between. As much detail as we can get about activity as far as parking is concerned. With our Luke program, which are the pay and display systems, we can narrow that down to the hour of any day you request, how many people came in and parked in X lot versus Y lot. So we do go into a great deal of detail as far as breaking out our revenues and costs as far as parking is concerned.
So anecdotally, I think I've seen an increase in use in some of the lots outside of the harbor, by funk zone activity. Is that bear out in your experience as well?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Rouse, yes, that is true. We've especially seen an increase in our Garden Street parking lot, whereas a number of years ago you'd go by in the middle of the day and you'd maybe see 25% of the lot full, if that. Now, if you were to go right now, you'd probably see it 90 to 95% full. A good portion of that has to do with construction workers who are using a lot, who have bought permits, who are using a lot as a place to park. As you know, there's not a lot of parking in that area, so they'll use the lot to park, go work, and they'll be out of there by 5 o'clock. So once all those projects wrap up in the coming months, we might see a slight decrease, but at the same time, we've also got funk zone businesses and software companies and things like that locating down there, and they need places to park their folks. So they've been coming in and purchasing more permits as well. So it's something we're keeping an eye on and figuring out how to address that in the future as the funk zone continues to grow.
And my last comment is that, as somebody who gets a lot of input from your various and sundry tenants and all the harbor users, this department is seen in a very positive light by your tenants. So you're doing something right, so well done.
Mr. Dominguez?
So to stay on the parking questions, the permits you show there's going to be a decrease from 2016, a little bit of an increase from this projected fiscal year. Do you guys have a goal for permits, or what do you see the trend will be for the next year or two?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Dominguez, parking permits, the purchase of parking permits has definitely been on the rise over the past years, and I think that's a combination of the funk zone really coming online, but also the fact that we see a whole lot more people down in the harbor, whether it be the weekend or the weekdays. It's just a nice place to be, and so we have seen our parking permits increase. I think right now annually we sell about between 4,000 and 4,500 parking permits. As to how that's going to be impacted in the future, again, who knows? Maybe the funk zone flames out and the upper part of State Street takes on, and it's a shift. So we do monitor how many permits we sell per year, obviously, and try and predict as to what we're going to see in the coming years. But we don't have a goal per se as to let's sell 5,000 permits. We don't do that. We set out our booths when permits become available in December, and we're there for the public, but that's about as far as we go. And we advertise that, hey, your new parking permit is available now, and that's primarily so people don't get caught in a situation where it's January 5th and they have last year's permit and they end up getting the ticket. We don't want that to happen. We want them to have a good experience down there.
And you mentioned the Garden Street lot is now predominantly used during the day, and a lot of it is commercial use. Have you thought about changing the commercial versus recreational permit pricing?
Right, Madam Mayor, Councilmember Dominguez. Right now, for the general public who comes down to get a permit, I should say when we start at the start of the year, it's $100, and that gets you into all of our parking lots minus Stearns Wharf. The only differentiation is we do have special permits for slip holders, one per slip. So it's our red and our blue permits. As far as looking into more of a construction-related or outside of the red and the blue permits, it is something we've talked about, and I'm again, with that activity in the funk zone, and it's probably not going to go away, and it's just going to get more intense. I believe we do need to start looking at possibly some possible changes to our parking program to work with those folks.
And it makes sense. I know your parking use is different than the general city's parking use because of the waterfront and specific activities. But, parking is one of the foundational components of our transportation and circulation. So if you're not proactively engaged, trends could change that wouldn't necessarily be beneficial for our environment, our economic policies. So to the extent you guys can be more proactive and see, how you're using it as a positive revenue situation, if we're going to be getting into heavy capital expenditures because of the water line, because of the shoaling. I know it seems like it's going great now in terms of balancing between cost and use, but we may want to keep a closer eye on that or manage it a little more heavily. So I'm just throwing that out there. So you mentioned in the opening different purchases like the radios and the marina management system. I'm trying to get a deeper understanding of how we categorize some of this equipment. So the radios, if I understood you, that was in the supplies and services.
That's correct.
And why wouldn't that be a capital equipment? Is that something you're buying on a regular basis, or is that a several-year system?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Dominguez, radios generally last for a number of years. The radios that they currently have are outdated, so we want to update those. As far as why it's classified as a supply and service versus capital, I'm going to have to look at that and get back to you. That's a great question. And I can look into that and get back to you. Maybe, Scott, do you have a...
And kind of part of that same question, you had the marina management system that was in capital equipment, and the cameras was down in non-capital equipment?
That's correct. So the marina management system, again, is a software product.
And what's the life cycle?
Our current marina management system has been in place for over 20 years, actually. So we're hoping, if we can get a good 10 years out of this, that would be a good thing.
And then the cameras?
Cameras, again, I think our last cameras were about 10 or 15 years, and they're just outdated.
And so why is that in non-capital equipment?
Again, as far as these smaller purchases of, between $30,000 and $75,000, I'll have to look into that as to why the amortization versus not and one-time costs.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, Councilmember Dominguez, it's a judgment call we make about how large a project is as to whether we treat it as a capital or supplies and services. A general rule of thumb has been $100,000 or more, kind of tends to flip over into the capital side. These tend to fall, I believe, less than that. So it's a judgment call about which line item we put it into.
Okay. On G461, and by the way, I appreciate you coding your slides to these pages. It's really helpful. You mentioned there's meetings, federal, state, and local, and the state, there's 8 proposed. So just hearing what we heard about the shoaling and about Beacon and participation in different interagency systems, would it make sense to increase that goal, or are we having meaningful input into some of these agency decisions, or is it not seen as valuable?
Mayor Schneider, Councilmember Dominguez, that's a good point. We may want to be a little more aggressive. In the past, when we worked on our grants from the Division of Boating and Waterways, Scott and I routinely went to Sacramento and lobbied on behalf of those things. So it kind of depends on where we are with that grant. We may increase that goal and increase that exposure. We will also be working with Congressman Carbajal to ensure that he supports the dredge funding every year. We just had some good news that the budget just came out, and the operations maintenance budget from the Corps is $3 million. So our lobbyist and somebody back in Washington is doing a good job looking after us. But that's a very good point. It does require some exposure between ourselves and our lobbyists and those individuals that have an influence over those revenue streams for us.
And are we doing anything regionally with Ventura? Is there any ways we can cooperate regionally?
Mayor Schneider, Councilmember Dominguez, that was the grant application that Beacon applied for on our behalf, was a coordination with Ventura and Channel Islands. And that coordination is looked favorably upon. It's a little surprising that the Division of Boating and Waterways didn't approve this grant cycle, but I think we're going to get back with them, work on how it's configured and the emphasis on what they want to fund, because it is a grants program that they want to fund. They just didn't fit this time, and unfortunately for us, I don't know that we can wait till 2020 with that condition. Nevertheless, the West Beach shoaling is something that happens on a regular basis. It's slow but sure. It's like a 10-year cycle as opposed to the harbor entrance, to which twice a year it kind of fills up and needs to be dredged out. But yeah, we do plan on working with them. I think regional sediment management is something that the federal and state agencies look favorably upon.
And regarding customer service, so it sounds like our customers are generally pleased. Do you have a systematic way of polling them or surveying them?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Dominguez, we don't have a systematic way so much, but people are not shy down at the waterfront. When they don't like something, you all hear about it, we all hear about it, and we respond as quickly and as accurately as we can when we know when something's brought to our attention. But they come right into the office, fill out the complaint form, shoot out the email, whatever, and I think we're very responsive, I think. And we also attend the merchant meetings with the merchants. Brian's been real active about bringing a police department officer down there, Public Works, with all the construction that's been at the foot of the wharf. And so we really try and, work with the tenants and the boat owners as well. We have our Dock Lines publication that goes out and tries, so everybody knows what's going on and what the latest things are. So
Great. One question I forgot about parking. It looked like the hourly employee hours was going up quite a bit, 1,000 hours. And I saw you had a budgeted item of, I think, a couple $100,000 for the self-parking equipment. So what's happening with these two seemingly contradictory data sets?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Dominguez, upon initial look with the pay and display system, one would think, oh, you're getting rid of a kiosk, now people can take care of their parking themselves, which is a logical assumption. And the next thought would be, well, that's fewer people that we need out in the parking lots. It's actually the opposite. When you're sitting in the kiosk and people are coming in, that's your one check-in, check-out point, and that's it. The people are in and they're doing their whatever they do in our parking lots. So when we work on this pay and display system, it ramps up the amount of monitoring we do. So we have to go out and actually, whereas a kiosk, they're in, that's the end of it. Whereas with the pay and display, we've got to monitor the lots and make sure people are coming in and paying for the time that they're there. A lot of it is also, especially in these, we've had these about 5 years, but we're rolling them out in more parking lots. We need to get out there, and we do a ton of customer service as far as here's how this system operates. And we'll have somebody stand there and help people out and guide them through the system. So it's more of a hands-on approach. Again, parking is generally the first people they come in contact with, as well as the last, as when they come down to the harbor. We want that to be a positive experience. So we do have we have a number of an increase in monitors who are going out and monitoring those lots just to make sure everything's okay.
So are we converting some lots?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Dominguez, we have just recently added a few lots with the pay and display system, primarily Ledbetter lot, which was, as you know, is a kiosk. If you go out there now, there's no longer a kiosk, so those are all pay and display. And it's been working wonderfully. As you know, that's a heavily used City College lot, and the thought was about 95 to 99% of the people in there on a school day were City College, and they have a permit, so they're not charged. We would maybe generate $20 to $40 a day. We're now seeing with the pay and display lots that we're getting more people who are just using the beach as well, which is great. So we're seeing that revenue on a daily basis go from $40, $50 to $400 to $500 just because more people are using it. So the Ledbetter has been the latest lot. We're also adding additional machines at some of our existing lots that already have the pay and display, whether it be our Harbor West lot. And we're working on some permitting as well and design review for adding additional machines at Garden Street, Chase Palm Park, and Cabrillo East and West. So it's been a really good program. I know that the airport downtown parking is looking into the Luke pay and display system as well. And so we all kind of cross-coordinate our activities.
Great. Thank you very much.
Mr. White?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, first, a comment on the praise that's come to you deservedly from others. The element that just so sticks out on the waterfront is the sense of community, real community that's gone on. You have the tradition. We have the tradition down there that goes back, literally decades, if not close to a century. And some of the people that are part of that community were there a century ago, and they're still sitting on that same bench. But there are lots of eyes and ears. The Live Aboard program is so embedded into the fabric. It's just a lot of neat collaboration that goes on there, to say nothing of colorful stories. I wanted to ask a couple of questions. One is about the City College parking. Could you describe that program, how that's different, or how that pairs up with the normal city program?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember White, this all goes back to the joint powers agreement that the city has with City College as well as Old Spanish Days. So it goes back many, many years. So basically, to simplify it as best as possible, if you have a Santa Barbara City College parking permit, you're allowed to park in our Ledbetter lot as well as our Harbor West lot during school hours. We also work with the LaPlaya East and West lots, which are adjacent to the stadium, where they manage those on the weekdays, and obviously all City College students are parking over there, but on the weekends, any revenue they generate from those two lots is then turned back over to us. So we are in constant contact. We work together with City College. We have a very good working relationship with them and their parking staff. But again, in its simplest form, City College parking permits are valid in those two lots, the Ledbetter lot and the Harbor West lot.
Okay, so then the property line is, what is that, where is that? I mean, is the LaPlaya, the lots that are next to LaPlaya are not city lots, those are City College lots, is that right?
Madam Mayor,
Of course, there's
Councilmember
Pershing too.
Councilmember White, Pershing Park, that's City College, that lot. And the LaPlayas are right adjacent to the stadium and then across from the stadium. Those are City College run. I believe they're actually on city land and under a very long-term lease to the state or to City College.
A very long-term lease that's got a very long time left in it?
Yes, I will not be there to renegotiate that one, I imagine. And then across Cabrillo Boulevard or Shoreline Drive, as it is there, those are our lots, waterfront lots, Ledbetter and Harbor West.
Okay.
So we have this shared use agreement with City College, but it's a little bit unbalanced because City College gets to use our two lots whenever school is in session, which is like 9 months out of the year, and now they have 2 summer sessions. So we get the use of those well, the summer sessions mostly they can contain on campus, so we get more use there, but we get to use the LaPlaya lots much less frequently than they get to use the waterfront parking lots. But we do use them during peak summer times, overflow trailer parking for the trailer boaters and so forth, and big events. We coordinate out in advance, like the Harbor Festival and things like that, 4th of July. We control them during those events.
Okay, thank you. Maybe some more, that would be perhaps, I'd like to learn a little bit more about those specifics. And then finally, the boat replacement schedule, which I know you've started on a couple of years ago. Could you describe what's going on with that now, please? You don't have a slide on that, do you?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember White, that's the Vessel Reserve Fund. We started up a couple of years ago, and I'm happy to announce that we put it to use. We were just about finished constructing a new Patrol Boat 1. We used some of those funds along with some capital funds that we were going to use to repower the vessel, and realizing that we had this separate pot of money for which it was intended, we were able to build a brand new boat as opposed to putting new engines on a 30-year-old boat. So that's worked out great. And the long-range plan is for Boat 2 to be replaced in 6 years. So in that time, the Vessel Reserve Fund should accrue enough money to just pay for it completely out of the fund as opposed to a single capital outlay that would impact the entire budget. So it looks like it's going to work out great for us, similar to what Motor Pool does, and it's off to a good start.
Great. It is off to a good start. I'm delighted that, and particularly in these better times, to be starting to, we're struggling in so many other capital areas that it's nice to have one part of our system that's working as it should. I mean, obviously our vehicle, our car program is showing the way on that too. And this is a 3-year-old program kind of thing. I'd appreciate seeing, and I think that the council would over the longer term, that vehicle replacement program as a spreadsheet, just something that's showing where you are, how much is in it, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, it's being new. It can't be fully funded yet, but how's it looking, and how do you see investing in that? So I think that would be helpful for decision makers to see that. And congratulations on starting it and now effecting it. I remember the conversation about this old boat and just where do you put your money, and throwing money into an old vehicle is obviously we've all done it, and it's nice when you can just start afresh. And believe me, the ocean gobbles things up in a big way, and this is a good way to go.
A couple questions for me. So on parking, with the Cabrillo Arts Pavilion scheduled to close next year, I mean, are you accounting for that in parking revenue or lack of? Because there won't be events there, and the restaurant will be closed, and all of that.
Madam Mayor, we have accounted for that as far as the Cabrillo East and West lots are concerned, and the revenue we anticipate them generating. We brought that down a little, those two particular lots, because they are going to need some construction staging and things like that. As far as the larger lot, which is the Cabrillo West lot, we'll still be able to use that lot for the most part. Again, we're really going to have to work with Parks to see how much construction parking they're going to need.
Well, it's not necessarily the construction staging, it's the less number of people going there because there aren't any events, or the restaurant's not open, or the beach house, the boathouse is not open. So I imagine the activity is going to diminish quite significantly, which means less parking revenue, because the demand isn't there.
That's correct as far as the Cabrillo East and West lots are concerned. Right. We also anticipate, I believe they're looking at moving the junior lifeguard program to another lot, possibly overdoing that at Ledbetter. So a decrease in one side is an increase in the other.
So to get back to the pay and display, if there's increased monitoring, you're concerned about customer service, we know people at the kiosk, have that capability of being the first person. Why are we then shifting to a pay and display? I mean, I know people get confused with the thing and supposed to just paying someone right at a kiosk. Why don't we just keep the kiosk folks?
Great question. And it's interesting because really the Luke Pay and Display, people love it. They love to do things on their own. It's easy. They simply slide in their card, get their pass, and they're done. So it's very user-friendly. We've heard very positive feedback from the people. We get a lot of foreign visitors, and it's right up their alley. Okay. I think they understand it better than we do. So it is a little interesting how you would think about that and the kiosk going away and that lack of personal touch. But I think we actually have more people out in the lots providing that personal touch to folks.
The dredging issue and the lack of the federal grant, which is unfortunate, but the issue, it's not in federal money anyway, the $600,000. Are there state opportunities for funding, or have we looked into that as a possibility?
Madam Mayor, it was a state grant with the State Division of Boating and Waterways. Yes.
The Boating and Waterways, right? Okay, I'm getting. But but there was the federal grant that didn't come in.
That was a state grant.
It was a state grant that didn't come in.
The federal funds have been solid and good, but they'll only dredge the entrance channel, and they won't go out 1 inch outside of it. So,
right, of course.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, and I'm sure Congressman Carbajal knows about the Coast Guard station there in the harbor and all that, but I'm sure they would love a tour and with staff and, so I don't know if you've reached out to them, but that's always a good way to bring home the idea and the importance of that funding. So that might be something to consider since it's his first year in office. I have to compliment you on the last few 4th of Julys. I've been down there, but and the evening everyone knows about, but really during the afternoon, I know there's been in the last couple of years sort of increased perspective on. There's a band, there's music happening on the beach, and it's just sort of as people are gradually coming in during the day, and it's just a great vibe for a fun day in anticipation of the fireworks. And so it's not just about the fireworks; it's about the whole day. So just to say thank you for that, and I'm sure next one's going to be just as great. Two things coming up this summer, and I don't know if there's any marketing around to get people to the harbor at the same time or preparing for parking. One is the Foresters coming back to Pershing Park and having a regular schedule there. Obviously, the lot there is the City College lot, but across the street is the harbor, and there's a harbor lot and things. And I don't know if there's a way to encourage people to go to Brophy's afterwards or beforehand, or some kind of cross marketing when there's a home game. And I'm sure the Foresters would love to work with you. They sometimes do raffles or something, and there might be a nice way to connect because that's the first time they've been back there in years, and I think there's a lot of hype around it. So, and you're right there as the neighbor, so that would be kind of fun. And then the other big event I really have to thank you for is working with the Music Academy of the West and that big event. I don't know. I think everyone knows July 31st is the entire New York Philharmonic is performing at La Playa Stadium. They're having $10 tickets, and they're going to have a fireworks show, and it's just going to be this really, I think, the largest kind of outdoor musical type of classical musical venue, if not ever. I mean, it'll be bigger than the Bowl. It'll be bigger, So, and I know that's a lot of work on your end, that you've been working with them on the coordination and closing the streets and parking. So, thank you for that, and that's going to be a very exciting event. Speaking of working a lot during events is your Harbor and Seafood Festival, and I've wondered if you've ever considered, I know you're going to dread me saying it, but I'm going to say it anyway, no. See, he's already saying no. You don't want to have it a 2-day festival? You want to cram it all? I mean, it's so crowded that one day, and I just wonder I know Earth Day did that. They had that one day, and it was just so much energy and work, and they said, well, we should just do it over the weekend. But are you feeling like it's just too much of an impact at the harbor for... I guess the answer is yes, just by looking at your face, but yeah.
Madam Mayor, we do get that frequently because the vendors would love it. But it is such an impact on the harbor in terms of shutting down all the parking. A few years ago, one of our harbor commissioners asked about that, and I went around over the holidays when it was kind of quiet and talked to all the tenants about what do you think 1 day versus 2 days. Should we continue with the Harbor Festival? Do you benefit from it? And what's interesting is most of our tenants really don't benefit from it, but they all love it, just to have that down there. Some of the the yacht brokers don't sell any boats. The fuel dock doesn't sell any more fuel than they would, but they all really support it and really enjoy it. But the 2-day, and then I asked them if they think it should be 2 days, and they all went, no, don't do that.
Okay.
So, and the amount of work that goes in is really considerable. I think we're all involved on that day. And most of us can't even walk the next day after. I think our parking supervisor wore one of those things that measures a pedometer or whatever.
Yeah.
And he walked like 20 miles that day or something. So it's a huge,
literally a marathon.
Yeah,
day.
it's a huge effort.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for that. And then I just want to echo Councilmember Hart's comments about funding and preparing for sea level rise capital needs, and maybe like a vehicle replacement fund, maybe there's a line item, just start putting money into something, because there might be grant opportunities that would require a match or something, and just to have that, just to start preparing for that would be helpful. So I want to echo that. Mr. Dominguez, do you have something else? I just want to note the time because we have 2 more presentations too.
Quick question on the reserves. I didn't catch it in the presentation. Did you say where our reserve would be left? Because it shows a $2.8 million use of reserves. Where will we stand after that?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Dominguez, our reserves, as we plan our budget every year, as Carl mentioned earlier, we do a 6-year cash flow model. And so, and mixed in there is our Division and Boating Waterways loan and debt ratio coverage and things like that. So we really plan out accordingly. So we will be using some reserves, but as is generally the case with the waterfront department, Our revenues come in higher than we anticipate, and our expenditures generally come in lower than we anticipate, and that difference then gets thrown in to our reserves. So we always maintain a comfortable level of reserves. I believe our Harbor Preservation Fund has a minimum of $2 million, and so we won't come near going below that. So our reserves are comfortable at this time.
Do you know what the number is?
Offhand, I believe in June 30th of 2016, if you'll bear with me 1 second here.
And just as a general note, maybe to Paul, Casey, can we add in a line on these department summaries that show the reserve after their estimated addition to or use of?
Oh, back to me. Our Harbor Preservation Fund at the end of June 30th, 2016 was almost $4.4 million, and that was before, obviously, the additional revenues that we received in fiscal year 16 and the lower amount of expenditures as well. So that just keeps going up, but it's given us the ability to, as Carl mentioned earlier in his capital program, we're going to go ahead and pay for Phase 8 of the Marina One replacement project.
So we're taking $2.8 million out of there in this fiscal year proposed.
That's correct.
So it's going to drop down to 1 point something, and that we're comfortable with that?
It's going to drop temporarily, though. Again, our revenues generally come in higher than what we anticipate, and our expenditures lower. So we just keep pushing that.
I think Mr.
The amount
Samario
of
wants
the amount of
jump in.
reserves forward.
Mr. Samario?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Dominguez, Bob Samario, Finance Director. The waterfront has a reserve requirement of about $3.5 million based on their operating budget. That's for the disaster reserve, and the contingency reserves, that's the 25%. They also have a separate reserve that meets their capital requirements, and that's, as Mr. Bossi indicated, is about $4 million, which is above what it would be if we applied the same rules to other enterprise funds, so they're healthy in that regard. And then in addition to that, they're about $2 million in reserves above their policy requirements, so they have enough that they have within the Harbor Preservation Fund reserves above policy to cover the 2.8. And I think Mr. Bossi is correct that by the end of this coming year and even next year, because they tend to budget conservatively on the revenue side, they always end up with some surplus at the end of the year that kind of replenishes that. So my guess is they won't come close to using the $2.8 million that they're budgeted to use next year.
Thank you, Mr. Samario. And you gave a great presentation yesterday at Finance. And maybe there's a slide from there we can steal as a template for all the departments regarding reserves.
Mr. Casey, did you want? Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you very much. We'll go from boats to planes, right? Airport is next. From water to air. Good morning.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. Hazel Johns, Airport Director. I'm going to start off with just an overview of the airport. Budget, we'll talk about the overview, our fiscal year 2018 recommended budget. We do have a couple of slides on our cash flow for the next 4 or 5 years, and then talk about our key initiatives and performance measures. One of the, I know that you all are aware that the airport is self-funding and that we do not get general fund subsidy. I keep this up here because there are some folks, even users of the airport, who think that we do get tax dollars. So I like to reiterate it publicly so that if they're watching, they know that we don't. Our revenues come from tenant rents and user fees. We are a certificated airport by FAA. It's Part 139, and we're heavily regulated by FAA and TSA. Our organizational chart, Deanna Zackerson is our business and property manager, and she does, that's where the money comes from for the airport. It pretty much all comes from property. She also does marketing communications and supervises our parking contract as well. Tracy Lincoln is our operations manager, and he supervises airport patrol and operations, which includes our ARF unit. Facilities planning and development, that's our public works engineers. And then Jeff McKee is our facility maintenance manager, doing grounds, the airfield, in our buildings. During 2017, we had 55.75 employees. And as you can tell, most of those employees are in maintenance and security and operations. I do have a slide on some recent achievements, just to identify some of the things that we accomplished in this past year. The updated passenger leakage study, as you know, we do that study, which tells us in our area between North County and down to the grade, how many people fly, where they fly, and which airports they use. And of course, we use that information in our Air Service Development Program. If you've been to the terminal recently, within the last month or so, you may have noticed some advertising, which we had not done before. In the 5 years that the building's been open, we've not had any advertising. We've had artwork, but no advertising, and now we do. We have a new program, and that started in April, which is a revenue source for the airport. And most of the displays are local, Cottage Hospital and other local businesses. We did complete a 2-year marketing plan, which dovetails with our Air Service Development Program. And we installed LED emergency battery backup lighting above the public stairways. That was quite a project because it wasn't done when we constructed, so trying to get above the stairs wasn't a chore. I'm really pleased to say that when we had the floods in February, our team worked together to get the runway back open within 16 hours. So we were closed for a day. But they really worked with Granite to get it back open. As you know, we've been short in patrol officers for years. But even though we have been short, our security call response did not diminish. It was consistent with 2015. And Tracy Lincoln and our operations staff conducted the FAA required full-scale exercise last fall, and it was successful. And we also completed 50% design on the runway 725 rehab. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tom Bullard, who's our administrative analyst, and he'll take you through our budget.
Good morning, Council. This slide is just a general overview, a high-level overview of the airport's FY18 proposed budget, about $21.8 million. Almost 90% of that is airport operations, capital, our development fund, and our T-Hangar fund. The airport capital and grants fund is composed of our FAA capital program and our passenger facility charges. And then our CFC fund, customer facility charge fund, is used to pay the debts, our city loan for the rental car quick turn facility. Just a quick breakdown by our different programs. Admin here kind of stands out as 34%, but admin pays a lot of the debt service for the terminal and other objects, and it also pays a lot of our department-wide allocated costs. So those costs add up quickly. Business and properties doesn't have very much staff, but they manage the parking management contract. And then in the certain ops division, about 60% of that 20% is our ARF staffing from the fire department. So some key budget changes in FY18. We're allocating an extra $91,000 for some additional city attorney's office help related to some of our developments that are upcoming. For example, 6100 Hollister, FBO, RFP, and the expiration of the Ampersand lease. We're also looking to implement a new ground transportation program. We're targeting coming back to council in June to kind of go over the nuts and bolts of that, but that would be to include limos, taxis, Lyft and Uber in our ground transportation program. That would be staffed by our parking management contractor, about $128,000 annually. To get that up and running, we would need to spend almost $82,000 on a one-time equipment purchase, and then have some ongoing costs to support that equipment of almost $20,000. And then we would anticipate generating almost $180,000 in revenue from that, and that would be a per pickup fee of about $3. Finally, we are projecting some major passenger increases, and we're budgeting some money for restarting our long-term Lot 2 shuttle. Right now, our terminal employees are parking in the long-term parking lot, and we would propose moving them over to the long-term Lot 2 using the shuttle during peak periods so the passengers could to backfill those spaces. Another big change to our budget, we're proposing an additional 5.25 positions concentrated in those maintenance, security, and certain ops divisions. So specifically, this includes the net costs above where we thought they might be in the budget originally. The extra quarter position, the number one, is to comply with TSA requirements for the airport badging office. Those continually are increasing. The second and third items are really related to our upcoming airport developments, 6100 Hollister and the 495 South Fairview lease returning to the airport. So the senior property management specialist is a current position, but we're proposing to upgrade that position to a supervisor level to kind of reflect those proactive business development opportunities we have coming up and some supervisory responsibilities. The airport maintenance coordinator, with those extra buildings, major facilities coming online, we anticipate some major maintenance needs. The senior airport operations specialist, this is really to fully staff our certification and operations division in their FAA required duties, things like airfield inspections and airfield condition reporting. And then the bottom one, these are currently hourly staff who do some TSA required duties, such as manning the curb outside the terminal. They're the people who tell you to move along if you're sitting there too long, and do some employee screening. And this net increase is essentially the cost of benefits, since we're already paying them as hourly employees. So the overall cost for all of these position changes is about $290,000 for FY18 and almost $320,000 in FY19. Here's our proposed expenditures. The last column is a percent change from FY18 budget versus FY17 amended budget. And I'll just touch real quick on these. In the left-hand column, the non-FAA capital fund. That first slide that showed kind of the big 90% of our money being spent in the airport operating fund, this is kind of where it all goes. So our capital expenditures that are not FAA funded, our development fund, as you may recall, earlier this year was created with the sale of property to direct relief to fund further development at the airport. And then our T-Hangar fund was to construct some revenue-generating T-hangars. It was a loan from the state DOT in 2007. So just to highlight a few of those key budget changes, in FY17, we anticipate having some vacancy savings. This continues a trend that we've had at the airport for the last few years. We've had vacancy savings in the 8% range. And then also in the big change from budget, that includes the staffing increases that we talked about a little bit earlier. In the supplies and services, that includes those costs for the ground transportation program and increased legal services. And then special projects, the big bump there is for the resumption of the long-term Lot 2 parking shuttle. Finally, we have a $75,000 transfer out. This is to the IT department to replace the airport's property management and accounts receivable system. It's outdated now. And then again, the development fund looks like a really big decline, but this was a one-time revenue source, and we have one-time expenditures associated with the development at 6100 Hollister. The capital grants fund, the expenditures in the passenger facility charge, that's to fund debt service on the airport terminal. That's about $1.3 million paid by the passenger facility charge fund of the total $3.1 million that we pay annually. The FAA capital projects, this is our grant fund. And there looks like a big donut in FY 2018. Typically, we get our funds from the FAA in the summer, and we come back to council usually in July, depending on the FAA when they release the funds to us. Fee changes. We have one proposed fee change to the airport parking rate. Our terminal long-term lot, we're proposing going from a $12 daily maximum rate to $13. That's about a little over an 8% increase, and since it hasn't been increased in since FY 2002, that's an 8% increase spread over about 6 years. We also did a survey of some comparable California airports, and this seems to be right in line with those. Some key revenue changes. In our GA, that's general aviation, and commercial industrial side, we anticipate some stable levels of activities in FY 2018. One major exception, we have one tenant that is coming vacant. We anticipate for about 6 months for a loss of about $150,000. Try to fill that as fast as we can. And then also the Ampersand lease expires in May of 2018, and the facility reverts to the airport. That's the 495 South Fairview hangar here. The bulk of those revenues we'll see in FY19, maybe a little bit in FY18, but we anticipate about 10 months and $1.5 million in FY19 from that facility. And then also we have the 6100 Hollister development that we anticipate coming online and starting to generate revenue in January of 2019. CFC fund, our revenues here continue to be strong. It's been generating $400,000 to $500,000 surpluses for the past few years. So we anticipate being able to retire the debt early in fiscal year 2020. And then finally, we have some really significant changes in air service. Not really any reductions, but some significantly larger aircraft. So going from 50-seat aircraft to 70 or 128 or even 150-seat aircraft. And that really impacts our budget because those bigger aircraft pay higher landing fees, they buy more fuel, and they also carry more passengers. So another big change we have here, our enplanements are going to increase significantly. We're projecting in 2017 that they'll increase almost 11%, and then in FY18, 13.5%, and then in FY19, another 3%. So those are significant changes that really impact our budget positively. So just a quick overview of what these line items here are on the left-hand column. Commercial industrial revenues are the revenues that we generate from our airport-owned property, typically north of Hollister, for building leases. Non-commercial aviation is aviation-related revenue not from commercial airlines. So this would be like our fixed-base operators, maintenance providers, and other aviation uses. Terminal revenues include parking, rental cars, and concessions revenue from the restaurant and gift shops. And then commercial aviation is revenues from the commercial airlines, so that's things like building rental, landing fees, and fuel flowage fees. And then again, the development fund, this is the one-time revenues that we receive from the sale of property to direct relief. And the T-Hangar fund receives revenues from the T-Hangar tenants. So that building vacancy, we anticipate our commercial industrial revenue down about 1.1% from budget. And then the ground transportation program, the $180,000 revenue, we see as a portion of this increase in the terminal revenues. The remainder of that is really driven by increased passengers and parking and rental car usage. And then on the commercial aviation side, those bigger planes, again, higher landing fees and higher fuel flowage fees as they take on more fuel. And again, the one-time expenditure here looks like a really significant drop, or one-time revenue source. The passenger facility charge is a locally imposed fee collected by the airlines. Again, this is used to pay the debt service on the terminal. We anticipate having almost a $200,000 surplus here. The grants fund, when we receive the grant, will come back for appropriations, and then the facility charge fund continues its strong growth. Again, about $400,000 or $500,000 surplus anticipated. So our cash flow projections here, this is looking at the operating fund and not the other fund so much. This is what we call the operating fund proper. The bottom line, those subtotals, you can see some pretty big jumps year to year. And there's some different revenue items going on each of those years. So in FY17, the airport operating fund had pre-funded some of those development activities for the design of 6100 Hollister light industrial development. This was reimbursement after the sale of the property. FY18, we see those larger aircraft and increased passengers. And then our commercial industrial revenues start coming online in FY19, and then the rest of it comes online in FY 2020. And also in those same years, the South Fairview lease really starts to generate a lot of revenue for the airport. On the expenditure side, looking down here at the bottom line, we project a gain of about $700,000 in FY 17. Our budget has a use of reserves of about $600,000. And then going out, the numbers really start to grow for that those surpluses. In FY 17, we have some significant vacancy savings. You see a big bump in FY 18 budget for staffing changes. We anticipate that we'll have some vacancy savings as we typically do. There's also some vacancy savings built in on those increased staffing positions because those aren't all going to be filled on July 1. And the supplies and services takes a pretty big jump. We have the ground transportation program, the legal services, and we also budget for our FAA grant match here. Fiscal year 18 is sort of an abnormal year. Our runway 725 rehab project will use about 2 years of our AIP appropriations, but we're also requesting discretionary funding from the FAA. So we've included a grant match that also includes that discretionary, the MAT portion of that discretionary funding. FY18, again, we have the long-term Lot 2 shuttle and the special projects. And then our transfer out to the IT for the property management system. So what does that do to our operating fund reserves? At the end of FY16, our reserves above policy were about $1.2 million, factoring in surplus in FY17 and use of reserves in FY18. And again, in 19, our reserves above policy never dipped below $565,000. And then going on from FY19, they only grow. And then some of our other fund reserve balances at the end of FY16. Our capital fund had a little bit of reserves from some project savings that we're proposing to use in FY18 to fund other capital projects. The grants and the FAA grants program is awaiting reimbursement for some of our grants. The PFC and CFC funds, again, have some really strong reserve balances. And then the T-Hanger fund, yesterday, we proposed some third quarter adjustments to clear up that negative reserve balance. So moving into our performance and some key performance objectives. initiate the transition of 495 South Fairview to airport ownership. It's a big revenue source. This is that the business and property goal is that airport vacancy that we were talking about a little earlier. We want to conduct some new survey research to help make some better marketing decisions. Our facilities maintenance group, we want to enhance some of our passenger amenities at the terminal by adding some electronic charging stations, repainting taxiway center lines, formalizing our notice of violation procedures for driving violations in the AOA, installing a new airport activity logging and reporting system. This would be a real-time web-based system. And then finally, completing construction of the runway 725 pavement rehab project. This is our grant project again. This is the main air carrier runway, and it's a really important project. Our FY18 capital projects, again, we're proposing to spend about $432,000 for our grant match for that project. We have some lessee building maintenance. This is sort of ongoing major projects that we try to do every year. Next year, we're looking at re-roofing and painting Building 305. AOA maintenance is to really make sure that the pavement in the AOA is in good condition. Street maintenance, we're looking to pave or rehab the long-term parking lot at the airline terminal. The airport radio repeater is to enhance the communications for the handheld radios between airport patrol and city police and dispatch. The vehicle ID system, this is to implement the ground transportation program. The Goleta Slough tidal restoration monitoring is year 7 of 7 that were, it was one of the conditions of the airfield safety projects. And then finally, we have some utility infrastructure that we want to make some repairs to some of our wastewater facilities. We presented our budget to the Airport Commission in April. And with that, we'll take any questions.
Madam Mayor?
Airport commissioners here as well. Yes,
Yeah.
Mr. Casey.
Can I just add one minor thing? It's a good collaboration. It's not a huge dollar amount, but it just came up in the last couple of weeks or so. We're going to continue to partner with the Chamber of Commerce with the visitor desk out at the airport, and the Chamber is asking to kind of help offset some of the cost, and so we're going to contribute $10,000 towards that effort. And I think it's a good collaboration between the two entities, and it's good to have a visitor desk there in the baggage claim area. So I just wanted to mention that we'll be doing that.
Great. Okay, so it's to the council then. Mr. Hart.
Yeah, I just want to say that's a great presentation. Thanks, Mr. Bullard, for all the details. And Ms. Johnson, your team, you really deserve a lot of kudos. When you see that turnaround charts with the air passengers, this has been a long haul. I know you have personally really committed a lot of work and energy to try and market the airport to additional plane and airport operators. And, it was not obviously clear through a number of years that you were going to get to this place. And it just really deserves pause and thanks and praise for your determination and commitment to make that happen, because the differences financially are extraordinary. It's really makes a huge difference to the fiscal stability of the airport. And I just want to really full stop commend you and all the folks that work at the airport for delivering on that. The other points I wanted to make was about the 495 South Fairview lease. So help me understand more. There's a big capital component of that, of getting that building ready to be fully leasable, and you're staffing up to have the people to do that. And then is the capital going to be a tenant improvement that's the expectation of the new tenant, or is the airport going to invest in that?
Mayor Snyder and Councilman Hart, it is a big responsibility. The facility, the hangar facilities and the office building, there's a 30,000 square foot office building that would also come back to the airport next May, as well as the ramp around the facility. We have in our FAA capital program, we have funds identified to replace some of the ramp because it hasn't been taken care of in the last 20 years or longer. The hangar facility is probably in better shape than we think. but it still needs some assistance, and the office building certainly needs some upgrades. As you know, perhaps you don't know, right now there's having some electrical problems with that facility, and we are working cooperatively with the tenant to try to resolve that. It hasn't happened yet, but we're optimistic. So yes, we anticipate that we will. The position that we're asking for in maintenance is someone who could come in and assist us in writing scopes of work to do capital projects, because it will require outside resources. But with the revenue that's possible from just storing corporate aircraft in those facilities, the revenue coming to the airport's close to $2 million a year. So we feel that we can come up with a capital program to make improvements using the revenues that we're generating to do that.
Oh, I see. So you're talking about breaking up these facilities into different components so that you would lease the hangar space, generate the revenue from that, and then use that for the capital improvements on the office buildings and have it phase over time. Is that what you're proposing?
Councilman Hart, yes, for the hangars as well as the office building, to try to have full use of it. One concept that we've discussed within the airport right now, that office building is in a zone called aviation facilities, which means under FAA regulations it cannot have a lease longer than 5 years. If we were to take that facility and the associated parking that goes with it and change the zoning to airport commercial, then we could have a long-term lease, which would benefit us and any tenant that would go in on a long-term basis. Most businesses don't like 5-year leases. They like long-term. So that's something in the back of our minds as well. But we're eager to take over the property.
And then I asked this other question of the waterfront department. You know, the other striking thing from this presentation from the USGS was the impacts from large storm events in a sea level rise environment to the airport. Extraordinarily large coverage area because it's a very low elevation. And one thing I didn't understand from that presentation was you had a flood event this year, which is probably very similar to what we're talking about occurring more regularly with sea level rise. But that was mostly just water coming down too fast all at once, no place to drain. So is that why you were able to get the airport operational so quickly, you know, to just recovering from that, the water eventually does move off property?
Madam Mayor and Councilman Hart, the flooding that we experienced came from the watershed. It didn't come from the ocean. But when you have high tide and water coming down, then you have the bathtub effect. And then once the rain stops and the tide goes down, then we're able to drain out and go through the Goleta Slough mouth, which is critical to keep it open or at least shaved down so that the water can recede. And we are at 10 feet. So that's about as low as you can get. But you did ask about the sea level rise report, and we did do a study with the Goleta Slough Management Committee. It's part of that program, and that document will also be incorporated into our environmental document for our master plan. So when that comes to Planning Commission and Airport or City Council this summer, you'll have access to that.
And it's less obvious what your capital improvements are to address that issue. I don't know, practically what can be done. I'm sure that's going to evolve over time, and you're going to have a lot more technical assessment of that. But your situation is much more complicated than the waterfront in the sense that you have multiple jurisdictions all overlapping with different responsibilities, controlling that space. And that, good luck on working that through over the next 20 years. But thank you again for the great news on everything financially and service-wise at the airport.
Mr. Hotchkiss?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm going to sort of go backwards from the notes I did. I may have missed this. Where do we stand on our solar project?
Madam Mayor and Councilman Hotchkiss, Jeff McKee is here, and I'd like him to give you an update on that, but it is going forward.
Good.
Jeff?
I'm Jeff McKee, the facility manager for the airport. I think we're tentatively on the agenda for City Council approval of the solar agreement on June 13th. We've come to agreement with the...
Say it again, I'm sorry.
On June 13th, I think we're tentatively coming to council for your approval for that project.
So you got a contract, and we just want to get it approved.
We do, yes.
Great. Okay.
It'll take an ordinance and that also.
The automated vehicle ID system. What is that?
That's a program, Councilman Hotchkiss, and I'm going to have Tracy Lincoln explain.
Good afternoon. The airport vehicle ID system it reads transponders and identifies the type of operator and the frequency of trips, and then it will allow us to bill those companies for those trips and compare it to the reporting and make sure that we're getting an accurate count. It would be used in the new commercial vehicle ground transportation program. They're very common at airports all over the United States.
So who carries the transponder?
The commercial vehicles have the transponders bolted on them, and we're working with the operators so that we can get the same frequencies of transponders that are used at some other airports to make it easier on them.
So this is commercial operations that are typically at the airport? In other words,
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Great, thank you. Do we have, Hazel, have we done a survey of passengers? It seems to me we have. Preferences, and it'd be kind of interesting to hear a little bit about that if we could.
Very well. Madam Mayor and Councilman Hotchkiss, yes, we did do a passenger intercept survey, and Deanna Zackerson is here and can provide some additional information.
Okay,
on
what was the year we did that?
Just this, in the last 3 or 4 months.
Oh, great, good, up to date, go.
Good morning. I'm Deanna
Morning.
Zackerson, Business Development Manager at the airport. Madam Mayor, Commissioner Hotchkiss. We actually, as part of the University of California, Santa Barbara's economic impact study, did an intercept survey at the airport. So we interviewed both visiting visitors to Santa Barbara, departing passengers who had been in Santa Barbara, as well as residents in Santa Barbara. And as you can see, as part of the plan moving forward, we actually hope to do some more public survey work so that we are able to in a more targeted fashion with our marketing, really get at the core of how we get folks in Santa Barbara to use the airport that aren't currently doing so.
So will we see that at the council at some point, or is this going to be closely held so we don't let the cat out of the bag?
Madam Mayor, Councilman Hotchkiss, we are proud of what we do and would be happy to share that definitely with Airport Commission as well as City Council.
Great. Okay, we'll look for that down the line. Regarding reserves, what's the policy? What percent of what? General, go ahead.
The reserves that the airport have are consistent with council policy, so we have 25% of our operating budget is held in reserves. And we also have a capital reserve, which varies based on the last 5 years of how much we've spent, but generally it's around $500,000. But we're fully funded.
Just looking through my notes here. The one-time $8.5 million expense was for what? Was for development of the, I'm not sure. You said it and I missed it.
Okay. Councilman Hotchkiss, when we sold the land to Direct Relief, we received about $8.7 million for that sale. That money is going to go in, did go into our development fund. So when we construct 6100 Hollister, which is our light industrial development that you approved April 11th or thereabouts, then we'll use those funds to pay for that. So we'll be debt-free when we complete the construction.
And what's our timeline on that right now?
We're working with the planning department, or with the building department at this point, responding to their comments. And as soon as we get the building permit, we're ready to go. And I think it'll be this summer we'll start. We'll do the bid and then hopefully break ground between now and September.
Oh, great. And are you 12-month projection after that or not?
Pretty much. I think we're targeting to get the first revenue in January or thereabouts in 2019.
Last question. Long-term shuttle number 2. That's the one that's chained off right now, right? North of Hollister?
North of Hollister, but we are utilizing that lot with some local businesses, car dealers who need extra storage for their vehicles. So we are generating revenue from the lot. But our idea is that during the peak periods, Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's at the terminal, with the increase in seats available. I think we're going to have to relocate the employees and then utilize that space for our passengers.
Will there be a reduced cost there because that's a slightly less desirable place than closer into the airport for parking charges?
At this point, though, it's going to be employees, so they just pay $25 a month for.
But when we open to the public,
when we do open with public, it is a lesser fee. It was in the past, and it would continue to be.
so it's 13, and we're proposing 13 in the long-term lot now.
Right.
So it'd be like, do you have any idea? Is it 10 or what?
10 or 11.
Do we have any fix yet on how profitable the new advertising contract in Space Soul has been or is projected to be?
I'd
Maybe
like
too
Deanna
early,
to respond to that since she's handled all the contracts on it.
Okay, perfect.
Alrighty, Madam Mayor, Commission Member Hopkins, that's a really exciting program for us because it's new. We haven't had advertising in the terminal before.
Right.
We're anticipating in the first full year of the program that Clear Channel Airports, which is the company that is running it, will generate somewhere in the neighborhood of $75,000 in revenue. Of that, the airport gets about 20% of it. It's not a huge revenue source, but this is one of the things where we really had to balance the aesthetics of the airport with the revenue objective of the advertising.
I've got to come out and take a look at that. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Mr. Rouse?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. A couple of quick questions about general aviation. In your non-commercial aviation revenues, is that what percentage of that is generated by FBOs?
Mayor Schneider, Councilmember Rouse, most of the revenue, the FBOs generate a lot of revenue, a lot of the fuel flowage fees and the landing fees they actually collect.
About 10% of the total revenue picture then. How many FBOs are operating at the airport currently?
We have 2.
Just the 2. And so in terms of our lease picture going forward, are those long-term leases? Are those stable enterprises as far as we know?
Mayor Snyder and Councilman Rouse, interesting that you'd asked that because that is a program part of our master plan. Implementation is to do a request for proposals for the fixed base operators. And as part of that also is to take the fixed base operator that's located south of the airline terminal and relocate to the north side of the field, north meaning over by where airport offices are. It's not going to be a simple process, but we will come back to council with a detailed report on how we plan to implement that particular program. But to answer your question, currently those leases are short-term. They're probably due to expire next summer.
Okay, yeah, because I've been hearing a little bit about that, and I do remember that from the airport general master plan. As current tenants, are they given any kind of sway as far as being tenants in good standing in terms of lease negotiations, or does automatically all go to RFP?
Councilman Roush, they're both tenants in good standing. They're very good FBOs, fixed base operators, nationwide and internationally. However, FAA says that if you have outside interest who have expressed an interest to be on the airport, then you need to do a request for proposal. In Santa Barbara, that's not happened in our history, but we have been approached by others who are interested. So that's why we want to do very carefully transparent process so that we do a request for proposals. It will involve development, so it's not going to be just, oh, here's the facility and go lease it. We're requesting that they actually do some improvements capital-wise.
And would that include actually providing a shell, or does the city provide the shell?
In this particular case, the airport would not provide a shell. We would assist with runways, taxiways, ramps, perhaps, that we could do with FAA funding. But the investment side of it would be the responsibility of the fixed base operator.
All right, thank you. And then my last question is about runway 15 in terms of what the problems we had in the past with the slough and the cut through to the ocean. What's the status on that? Because I remember there was some kind of a strange permitting issue, but obviously for fear of bird strike, that type of thing. What's your status on
Correct.
that, please?
Mayor Snyder and Councilman Rouse, we are still working on that particular project to keep the mouth of the slough open. As opposed to just breaching it, we have a proposal to grade it so that it's about 6 feet high, so that would allow the flow to come and go. We are still having difficulties with the National Marine Fisheries because of the goby and the steelhead trout. Although we don't have the trout, we have the habitat for it. So we have not been successful yet, but we're still working on it.
Got a serious habitat for insects too. I know that much.
Mosquitoes in particular.
Well, like Councilmember Hart, I would like to shower a little bit of praise on the airport in terms of the improvements we made over the time. I certainly want to make sure that the atmosphere and the facilities for general aviation are also. We talk about commercial aviation all the time, but a big part of our community is obviously general aviation as well. So those amenities are important to a lot of us. So hopefully that'll be something that comes to good fruition through this next phase and plan and the general plan. Thank you.
We hope so. Thank you.
Mr. White?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, there really is a nice sense of relief here. The new terminal has been the perils of Pauline since starting with the sort of in the middle of the great financial crash. We benefited really, didn't we, from low construction costs and interest rates, but at the same time taking a big chance to invest an awful lot of money, and so that was a risk taken that finally, now almost a decade later, is starting to show the good side. So congratulations on getting to seeing at least the other side of that really a difficult time. And obviously this 6100 Hollister Avenue activity with direct relief now, where are they in terms of their construction?
Mayor Snyder and Councilman White, they are under construction. They're doing, I think they pretty much have done the soil stabilization, and they're doing the beginning the part for the foundation and the tilt up. They have changed their hours of operation to where they're starting work at 1:30 in the morning, and going to 7 p.m. in the evening, doing 2 shifts. They really are trying to, I think, push to get it done as early in 2018 as possible. So they are well underway.
That's great. And then they will pay a sort of in lieu of property tax fee. Is that right? There's some kind of no.
Actually, no, because they're a nonprofit, and so as
But
a
I thought there was an
nonprofit.
in lieu fee of some kind that was
Oh, they pay
negotiated.
us. I'm sorry. I almost forgot that. They will pay, yes, to the city of Santa Barbara, an in lieu fee. Yes.
Okay. And then we had, or maybe still have, ground leases on the vacant areas there. We have had in the past. Are those still going on now? And so we're feathering those into the new construction project?
Once we sold the land, we lost about $274,000 in annual revenue. We were successful in keeping, I believe, 4, maybe 5 tenants that we had. So that's all we have on ground leases on the north side from that parcel. We do have some further north on Keister.
Have we been able to move the tenants around a little bit? Was there that opportunity, or just we simply didn't have the space to maintain
Of the
them?
tenants, we only were successful in keeping 5.
Oh, okay.
So we did move them, but those are the only ones we could keep.
And then I appreciated hearing that the construction then is going forward soon on the projects. Now that we have the money.
That's right.
And you said you're in process. Does that mean you have a coastal development permit for the buildings at this point?
Actually, Councilman White, we're on the north side of Hollister, so we don't need a coastal development permit.
Okay.
We're working with the city building department, and working out the final details on our design and construction specifications.
Okay.
So that's the only permit we'll need.
Well, there's zoning clearance of some kind, right?
It's zoned appropriately for commercial industrial.
Okay.
I
Not
think
understanding the question.
I think,
Land use
am I
permit.
missing something?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember White, this was the project that was here on appeal from the city of
Right.
Goleta that council approved the project
Right.
to go forward. So that's all the planning approvals that are required at this point. We still have to finalize the terms with the city of Goleta on a traffic mitigation fee, but there's no further required planning approvals.
Good, okay. Thank you. T-Hanger Fund. What is it? Why is there a fund? What is that supposed to do? I mean, I appreciate we have T-hangers and we have spaces for T-hangers. How does this work?
It goes back to our general aviation community. We were asked several years back by the GA community to provide state-of-the-art hangar facilities for those aircraft.
Right.
We approached the two FBOs. They elected not to do that. So the city and the airport, we took out a loan with Caltrans, Department of Aeronautics, with the state to construct 24 T-hangers. And so we have to keep that money separate. That's why we had to set up a T-hanger fund. And then the loan is paid off with the revenue that we generate from the lease of those T-hangers.
So do we have more space where we can build more T-hangers, and as the demand happens, we build more? How can you describe that?
That's exactly correct. We could, and that's part of the master plan as well. Based on demand, we can do more construction. There's land available for that. Quite frankly, general aviation, the smaller planes are not increasing. The real increase in general aviation is on the larger aircraft. So in constructing hangars, you want to be real careful that the size of it doesn't limit future use of it,
Sure.
which some of our big hangars, that's happened because you can't get the bigger planes in the World War II hangar facilities. So we will work with both the FBOs and our GA community to keep on top of the facility needs.
So we have lots of space left. You said there's 24. Is it like is there 40 left, or is it enough space for 40 more, or where are we?
Do you know, I'd need to go back and double check the master plan, but I know that we do have space in the infield for additional hangars.
That'd be nice to know.
We'll get that.
An area where I'm unclear and might be helpful for council to get a little more information is this transition of the ampersand building. You were talking about a ramp, zoning change. You know, it sounds like there's some real opportunity there. To describe that, describe a timeline for that, process for that might be helpful.
Okay.
Some of that, do you have any of that you can give now? What is the ramp?
I'm sorry, it is airport language. It's the asphalt or concrete pavement that aircraft are stored on the outside. So if you pull into a hangar, you have a piece of pavement in front of that hangar that's concrete or asphalt, and that's called ramp. In the old days, they'd call it tarmac. That's another term that they use. Okay. So the pavement around the hangar facility at Ampersand is not in good repair.
Okay.
So that's the part that we would use federal funding for to replace.
All right, and then the zoning change, that would be interesting to hear more back on that at some time. Is it a plan, or how does it move forward, and when does it happen?
Very good.
Great. So thank you for your good work, and it's really heartening to see those passenger numbers coming back up, as I'm sure you experience every minute.
Thank you.
Mr. Dominguez.
I want to repeat everyone's general positive comments about the airport. We're all really excited about the changes. I have some questions on G20 on the summary. So the authorized positions looks like it goes up 5.25. I was only able to count 2.5 on your slide 14, plus some part-time hourlies. Can you explain how many authorized positions you're seeking?
Councilmember Dominguez, we're seeking 5 1/4 positions, and I'm trying to race back to that slide. 3 of them are in the airport security division for those hourly security aides. A quarter.
Okay, so we count that as an FTE
That's an FTE,
okay.
yeah.
And on the security page, it looked like we were reducing hourlies by about 5,000 hours, and that's on G39.
Councilmember Dominguez, since those hourly positions are converting to full-time positions, we're showing a reduction in hourly hours.
Okay, so these 3 new positions are full-time positions?
Correct,
Yes.
FTEs.
And it only adds up to $90,000?
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
Net of the hourly salaries. So we're currently paying them an hourly salary, but
Got it.
the full-time.
Okay. The next question, the expenditures, the total operating expenditures you list as 21 million here, and on your slideshow it's 19 million. So which one is the correct number? I'm assuming the slideshow is newer?
No. Councilmember Dominguez, it's a little confusing. So the airport operating fund that's presented in the budget document, this slide right here, the $19.3 million here, is kind of composed of what we would call the airport operating fund, the airport capital fund, the airport development fund, and the T-hangar funds. And then those remaining funds make up the other $2.5 million-ish.
So the number on your G20 is 21,089,000. So is that supposed to be 21.08?
The total department expenditures is 21.8 because this includes the capital.
Well, then that would add up to 22.589. So you're adding in the 731,000
Correct.
to get to 21.8.
Correct.
So that's not a 1.5 million.
Sorry, that is not the actual capital program. That's our capital grants fund. So that's our FAA grants and our passenger facility charges.
So what I'm looking at is on G20, it's 21,089. So you're saying that's the 19,342 that we have on slides 15 forward, plus what categories? The airport capital grants and the airport customer facility, so that 2.5?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I follow that.
Councilmember Dominguez, the chart at the top of page G21 is sort of the same breakdown here. We've just pulled out the customer facility charge from the airport operating that is in that chart on the top left.
So the airport capital grants, is that a revenue or an expenditure category?
Councilmember Dominguez, this is showing the expenditures. There are revenues associated with that, though.
Okay. That's usually when I think of a grant, I think of it as a revenue.
Mm-hmm.
So you're just balancing out the revenue and the expenditure. Why don't we include these expenditures on our slides 15 through 20?
Councilmember Dominguez, the slide here is just showing the airport fund, and then the next set of slides break out the other 2 funds, the passenger facility charge / grants fund, and also the CFC fund.
Okay. Back on the G20 slide on the 2017 projected budget, we're showing a reserves addition of $8 million. And I didn't see that on our reserve slide 49 and 50. So how do we track where that $8 million gets allocated to these different reserve funds on slide 50?
Councilmember Dominguez, the projected amounts here in the budget document, I think are slightly different from a cash flow perspective versus a budget perspective. So, for example, the capital program includes a lot of rollover capital. So when you look at the amended FY17 capital program, there's $10.6 million. That was funded in previous years, possibly, and also this year. But we only project to spend about $2.4 million of that total.
Councilman Dominguez, on June 30th of 2016, the policy reserves, including the airport's capital, had $4.1 million. Additionally, the PFC fund has a surplus of $3.1 million, and the airport CFC fund had a surplus of $2.1 million. I believe that makes up that $8 million, pretty close. So it's taking all of our funds and all of the reserves and showing it in one line item, which is confusing for us. I'm sure it is for others.
So those were the reserves as of June 30th, 2016?
Yes.
So then it shows you're adding in reserves in 2017 of $8 million. So those numbers would double?
We're not going to have $8 million in reserves, additional $8 million.
That's the number on the bottom of G20 for projected.
So I would assume that the reserves that we have are maintained, and then the small amount of money that we would have, $500,000 or $750,000 from operating, would go into that, the total reserve amount.
So basically, I'm just trying to follow the money, and I'm assuming that's from the sale of the property?
It's the sale of the property.
Sale of property? I'm sorry.
We're not going to spend most of those proceeds this year, just the design portion of the project. So those $8 million will carry forward the budget to actually construct the facilities next year.
So why aren't they in a capital program or capital fund?
They are in the capital program. In that $10 million to $10.6 million amended FY17 budget, that includes the development of 6100 Hollister.
So is that $8 million then in the capital program, or is it going to be in reserves, or are you accounting for those at the same time?
It's in the capital program. It won't go to reserves. I mean, it's sort of a reserve because it's budgeted and tied up. It's not like we can spend that money. It's not available for us to spend otherwise, but we can spend it for the 6100 Hollister development.
So the reserves on page 49, that's not capital reserves. It's an operating fund reserve. So it wouldn't be listed there.
No, this is our airport operating fund proper. We don't have on either of these slides, it doesn't show a reserve balance because we didn't have a development fund at the end of FY 2016. It was just started this year in FY 17.
So we could do a slide like 49 for the capital fund. That would show, and then that would show the $8 million being added into the fiscal year 2017. Reserves above policy?
Yes, we could show that slide, and the reserves above policy for that fund would be $0.
Would be what?
$0 because we've budgeted for it. There's no funds available.
So I'm not sure if that's how a reserve works, though. If you've budgeted for it, is it still considered a reserve, or are you treating it as an appropriated reserve?
I think you might characterize that more like an appropriated reserve because it's sort of fenced off. You can't spend it on something else. It wouldn't be an available reserve.
Okay. The Slide 18.
Mr. Dominguez, I just want to, it's 11:15. I know many people have a noon. We have another important budget hearing. So if you have tiny little detail between slides, I would suggest asking offline because it's not going to impact the big budget picture, but I'm sure they'll be able to answer your questions before we finalize the budget.
Well,
So-
two hopefully quick questions.
Okay.
The supplies and services for 2018, $7 million. That just seems really high for supplies and services. It's more than our salaries. So again, I'm wondering about why we're categorizing certain things as supplies. I mean, supplies are short-term paper clips, paper.
Councilmember Dominguez, so that supplies and services includes our allocated costs that we pay to the city for HR, legal services, and that's almost $2 million.
Allocated cost is a different line item.
My
right below
apologies.
there.
It's ARF. ARF is paid to the fire department. That's almost $2.5 million.
So we're characterizing that as a service. Why isn't that a transfer out?
Councilman Dominguez, it's the way in which the city allocates cost, and in this particular case, it's done under professional service.
Okay.
And so professional service is part of supplies and services.
Thank you. Last question, G40, the security inspections, P3. Looks like we were a little under target. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, go ahead.
And that was down on the bottom, security, identification, display area, ramp inspections.
Which one?
Oh, I'm sorry, no, the top one. Complete the scheduled number of daily security inspections 90% of the time, and it's showing 58.
Yes, that's correct, Councilman Dominguez. That has to do with low staffing in the patrol division and some additional obligations with the TSA to where we have to spend more time in the terminal closer to the checkpoint within certain response parameters.
So what are we doing to fix this?
We're deep in the hiring process. We have 2 people in background check, another one enrolled in an academy that starts in June.
Can we use any private facilities to shore us up? I'm just concerned given the worldwide climate, what's happening. You know, security and safety is our top priority.
It is, and we have we've set our performance measures above the requirement, so we're still within our federal requirement. But we have not considered outside resources at this point.
Thank you.
Just 2 very quick things. Just a suggestion on the pie chart to carve out the debt service from the admin. You know, just I know that's going to go away over time anyway, but it's nice to have that as a segment. How is the High Sierra doing in terms of revenue? Has it gone up? Because I know there was some challenges in the first year or 2.
Mayor Snyder, High Sierra is doing okay. They're generally late on the rent on a monthly basis. We have to stay in touch with them pretty consistently. They're not doing a percentage rent, rather just a flat rent per month. But so far they have paid the rent, so they're current.
Okay. All right. So maybe we need to promote that a little more. It's a big space.
It is. It's a large facility.
Okay. Well, I just want to echo my colleagues in that it was either last year or the year before we were kind of bated breath, and there were some major issues and we said, hold on, it'll turn around, and I think do a lot of people's good work. It is, and obviously the market's changing, and hopefully the next few months we might have some more good news about things. So that would be great. And so thank you again for your presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go right into. I know we have solid waste to do, and I imagine some people might have some noon commitments. So let's see what we can do to be concise.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. Bob Samario, Finance Director, and I don't mind being concise. I do want to introduce our new Environmental Services Manager, Renee Irely. She's to my right, and she'll be covering a portion of the presentation. Next year, I expect she'll be doing the whole thing. We also have 3 people who are environmental specialists within the division, Dan Rao, Dustin Murbach, and Lorraine Cruz Carpenter. They're here to answer any questions as we get into the programmatic stuff. So we're going to do an overview of the divisions. I'm looking at revenues and expenditures, the proposed fees and ratepayer impacts, and then highlighting some of our work efforts. I will refer you to page G155. That's where the solid waste program resides. The solid waste program engulfs the Environmental Services Division. It's one of 6 divisions within the Finance Department. We took over the operation probably 8-9 years ago, and it's been here ever since. We enjoy it. You can see the organization chart. There are 8 full-time equivalent positions. We have the Environmental Services Manager, of course. We have 2 FTEs, recycling educator positions, that are currently vacant. We're in the process of recruiting for those. Then you can see the 3 environmental specialists to the right. We also have a part-time code enforcement officer, a part-time outreach coordinator, and then a full-time clerical staff. So, as you know, the activities of the Solid Waste Division is largely dictated by state law. It was created as a result of AB 939 back in the early 90s. There was a mandate that all cities and jurisdictions achieve a 50% diversion of their waste from the landfill by 1999. Of course, we met that. Other regulations, AB 341, which establishes mandatory commercial recycling statewide. There's a goal to get to 75% by 2020. And then more recently, 1826, which is now moving into the organics phase, or part of the waste stream, trying to get those out of the landfill. As we know, organics really have an impact in creating methane gas and those kinds of greenhouse gas emissions. So it's important to get the organics out of the waste stream. By 2019, businesses that have at least 4 yards of trash per week are going to be required to do some kind of recycling on the organics component. The division responsibilities include managing the franchise agreement with Marburg. As you know, we're in the middle of a 10-year agreement. That's a big part of what we do. They provide the collection and services for us and hauling the materials to the various facilities. We also do a lot of work working with the residents and businesses to help them understand the programs. We do work by way of various media outlets. As you can see in the third bullet, we do marketing through the print ads. We do radio, television. We are even on social platforms like Facebook and the like, and even Nextdoor, and we do tweet once in a while to announce events that may be coming up. And then, of course, we do long-term planning for the future of solid waste needs. Our budget is relatively simple. You can see most of our revenues come in to really essentially pay for the collection services that are provided by Marburg. So this is to pay their contract. It represents 87% of the money we bring in. We bring in about 11% to pay for our staff and the things that we do to promote diversion. And then there's other revenues that come in of like 2%. On the appropriation side, where the money goes, that money that I mentioned on the revenue side goes right to Marburg to compensate for not only the hauling and the collection, but the tipping fees that they pay, that we reimburse them for, that they pay at the various facilities. Salary and benefits represent just 4% of the overall budget. Supplies and services 2%, and so forth. So looking at the numbers again, G155 is where you'll see these details. I'm presenting more detail than what's in the actual budget document. Here are our proposed revenues. I'm showing the actual revenues for last year, our amended budget this year, and our projected budget, or actuals this year, and then what our recommended budget for 18 is, and then the change. You'll see that the biggest increase is in the solid waste fees, and we'll talk more about this. That's the first row. This is because of the relates to the resource recovery project coming online in the next few years. And under the waste services agreement, we will be looking to, at least the proposal on the agreement is to raise tipping fees to $99 from where they are today. Again, we'll talk more about that. Not many other changes. I will highlight in the middle, you'll see recycling revenues from the county, $191,000 last year, because we've seen the recycling markets really tank over the last several years. We are no longer receiving revenues, but in fact we're paying that, and you'll see in the next slide where we're actually paying the county to continue to process those materials at a loss. And then right below that, the recycling revenues from Marburg. We have an agreement in place whereby they share with us revenues that they generate for the recyclables that are collected in dumpsters. It's mostly the commercial sector. All the carts and cans go through the county and Gold Coast down south, but the dumpsters go to Marburg at their facility out by the airport. This year, you'll see that we're projecting zero. We have been working with them because they too are incurring substantial losses in their processing, and they do that, and they've been doing that for a number of years, even though they are incurring a loss. We gave them essentially a pass this year, but we're working on what we do in the next couple of years before the resource recovery project comes online. We are still proposing $178,000 next year for 18. That number could change based on how those negotiations play out. On the expense side, you'll see the large increase for hauler services. So this is the gross amount of costs we're going to have to be paying, an incremental cost for the tipping fee increases. You'll remember the revenue side only went up by $1 million, and that's because we anticipate and plan to use about $1 million in reserves to minimize the impacts to our ratepayers of that big increase. And I'll show you what that looks like when we get into the rates discussion. Everything else, no minor changes. I do want to point out toward the bottom, regional fees. You can see that they are increasing relative to the current year budget by almost $200,000. I'll draw your attention to the last year, $555,000. The reason it went down this year is because the contractor submitted a late invoice, so we actually had a reprieve this year. So the overall increase from 2016 is about $110,000 or so, $120,000. And most of that is one-time costs for some additional costs that the contractor incurred to clean up some of the materials, and the rest of it is really just sort of CPI increases. So proposed fees, the rate increases or the revenue requirements are driven by in three areas. One is to increase the compensation to Marburg for collection services. That's per our contract. The contract calls for increasing their compensation by a CPI, and it's equal to 70% of the published CPI for the area. The second component is for the tipping fees under the waste services agreement, which we'll talk more about. And then, as we talked about with the Finance Committee and Council, the proposed expanded neighborhood cleanup services. So looking at the first component, for Marburg, the CPI for this coming year is about 1.7. 70% of that is 1.2, so that's just going to be an automatic increase to their compensation. And we just add that to the bill. We spread it across all ratepayers. The expanded neighborhood cleanup services, so there's several components. One is to expedite the response to these illegal dumps. We are going to have the calls go directly to Marburg, and Ms. Irely will just talk about that shortly, about how we're going to roll these programs out. But that's going to require us paying Marburg an additional $10,000 for additional staffing that they'll need to handle the volume of calls that we expect that they're going to receive. We also have asked them to increase the number of abandoned waste collections that they will be doing from 2,000 currently to 2,500. That will cost about $33,000. We also want to establish a budget, and we're not sure who's going to perform this, but to ensure we have enough money to do cleanups of homeless encampments. And then lastly, in response again to the illegal dumping that we've seen, and it seems to be on the rise, we are asking for a $30,000 increase to the contract with Marburg, so we can do targeted pickups of those things rather than on a response basis from a call. If we hear that there are some things going on in different neighborhoods, we can send out those trucks and have them address those immediately. And then the third component and last component are the tipping fees we mentioned. So under the waste services agreement that we executed back in, I think, in December, it called for an increase of the tipping fees that the county charges for all materials. It's at the landfill for the trash, the transfer station for things like green waste and recyclables, that those numbers would go up to, those tipping fees would go up to $99 across the board. And then they would be ratcheted up over a 3-year period at $110 in 2019, and then the estimated amount of $125 in 2020 when we expect the facility to be operational. And the reason we wanted to do it in phases are for two reasons. One is it looks good when you're selling bonds that we have rates that are already kind of in place before the facility comes online, so it just strengthens that credit. And then secondly, at least in the first year, we wanted to create a jurisdictional reserve that provides some cushion for the project because there is some volatility, particularly in the recyclables. So we wanted to create a reserve for that. This is the Jurisdictional Rate Stabilization Fund. It's going to be set at $3 million. Our share is 1.2, and we represent 40% of the total waste delivered to Tehiguis, so that's our share. So the $99 a ton will actually generate more than that, about 1.8. which means that we expect a return or a dividend return in 2019 for the excess, which is about $600,000. But $99 a ton gets us to ensure that we establish that reserve in the first year. So this is what the revenue requirements are and how it translates into rate increases. The CPI that I mentioned for Marburg is $256,000. We do have some increases for public containers, and then the abandoned waste program and expanded waste program, that's the $100,000. Then 1.7, that's the increase of going to $99 for all materials in terms of the tipping fees. You can see that in gross terms, it's $2 million, and it would represent a 9.7% increase to rates. Because we're using $1 million in reserves next year, it lowers that to about $5.2 million. So when we presented this to the Finance Committee, there was a request from one of the committee members that we sort of show how this plays out over a longer period of time. We did a 3-year sort of forecast we wanted to show. We were asked to look further out. So we went to 2021, how this plays out. I made an assumption, and we'll talk about this more. I made an assumption that we will move forward with a $99 per ton increase next year, even though we may want to talk about that, and that it stays flat for the second year. So rather than go to 110 in the second year, it stays at $99 a ton, and then it ratchets up to 110 and 125 as the original schedule. As you know, the project has been delayed. We expect that it's going to be financed and to get off the ground this time in about January or February of next year. So we're working with the county to see if we can't delay that increase of $99 a year. But in any case, if we do move forward, then the alternative would be to keep that at $99 a ton in the second year. So that makes it that assumption here in those projections. And this is mostly to show you what kind of the impact is going to be in terms of their service charges and the impact on reserves and how we're planning on using reserves over the next several years to minimize those impacts. So you could see in 18, it's a rate increase of about 5.3%. The dollars work out to be 5.4, but you can see when we use reserves appropriately over the next 3 years or 4 years, it stays at about 5.4%. In 2021, it drops, and I'll explain why. So if you look at the third row of revenues, it says a dividend payment. I alluded to the fact that we would be paying more than we need for the jurisdictional reserve, about $600,000. That would theoretically come back in 2020. And then in 2021, because that rate, the tipping fee goes up again, and before the facilities are in place, we will essentially be overpaying by $2.4 million, and we would expect to get that back in 2021. So what you can see at the very bottom is, starting with the column of 2018, we'd be using in total about $1.4 million in reserves. We would be using an additional $766,000 in 2019. But then we're essentially balanced in 2020, and then we are able to restore those reserves and even get to a higher level than we are currently by 2021. So our plan is to reuse the reserves for a while because we know that they're going to be replenished down in the future. And that's kind of our plan, is to keep the rates at about 5 to 5.5% over the next several years based on this assumption of how we're raising tipping fees. So again, this is kind of how the reserves play out. We are currently at 3.1. By 2021, we would be at 4.8. But we are using those reserves over the next several years in theory. So impacts of rate increases. So this is essentially a 5.3% increase across the board. You can see what it does to the various categories of customers. These are single-family residential customers. These are typical examples. So there are a few dollars increases for each of these categories. Again, all 5.3%. When you get into the business customers or categories, the dollar's a little bit bigger because their bills are just bigger, but the rate increase is still the same at 5.3%. So we've already sent out notices for these rate increases, again, assuming that we're going to use about $1 million in reserves. The hearing will be on June 13th under Prop 218, and then the rates will take effect July 1, 2017. And you can go to our website to see those rate schedules. So before I turn it over to Ms. Irely, are any questions? We're going to want to come back and talk about. Okay, perfect.
Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and council members. So we've had another successful year of implementation on our programs. They've really been holding steady across the board. We wanted to highlight a few of our many objectives and measures, the first being our electronic waste events. They continue to be extremely popular. We consistently exceed our collection targets due to awareness and outreach. We actually have one of the best attended programs in the state, and this past year we collected over 348,000 pounds this year, really for a nominal amount of expenditure, really just for about $8,000 in advertising. We continue to work with and educate all the city facilities to increase their diversion and ensure that the city is leading by example. Our diversion rates are comparable to our citywide rates, which is good news. And this year we focused on working with the fire stations. In the coming year, we'll also be evaluating service levels overall at all of the facilities and just make sure that we're right sizing them so that we can continue to increase our diversion goals. And then thirdly, we've been working on implementing our waste enclosure guidelines, which are proving to be a very positive and proactive component of development review. These are to ensure that adequate space for trash and recycling is available and appropriate and safe access for all involved. They're widely known already in the building and architect circles, thanks to distribution through the building and safety staff and their website, the city's land development team, and then we've also integrated staff into the design review application process. This year we've commented on over 160 designs so far. And then finally, I wanted to touch a little bit more on our expanded neighborhood cleanup and abandoned waste program. It is part of our budget for 2018. We are going to start some rollout in June. We've been working on revamping our outreach and enforcement and the operations around illegal dumping. We have identified areas within the hotspots where we want to concentrate our efforts, and this is going to include a revamping and updating of our outreach materials, including canvassing specific areas to work more one-on-one within this problematic areas. We'll be putting up illegal dumping signage placed in these areas as well to increase awareness. And our code enforcement officer will be implementing targeted daily patrols in these areas so that we can have more eyes on the streets to see what's happening. We're also starting in July, we'll be reaching out to work with the neighborhood groups to increase their education and to engage their assistance as we roll out our projects.
Great.
So the final thing I'll mention is so we've been working and talking with the county, both public works staff, and I know Mr. Casey has been working with Mona, the county administrator's office. The idea of should we be delaying the tipping fee increases, July 1, pushing them back a year in light of the fact that the project has been delayed effectively a year. We haven't come to a final resolution on that. We've expressed our desire and preference for that delay, given other increases that we have in water and wastewater. The one thing I will say is that because our rates anticipate the use of reserves of $1 million, they are only at 5%. So if to the extent we delay that the tipping fee increases, then it would mean that we would just not be using reserves, and we would probably be able to lower the actual rate increases down to around 2% versus 5%. So just something to consider. We haven't come to a final decision or resolution on this, but we believe it would require an amendment to the waste services agreement to delay it a year, even though it's a minor change. And I'm assuming that the council would be supportive of that kind of an amendment, given that it would bias a year in terms of rate increases.
Great, thank you. I want to follow up on that, so if I could. And first, just before I forget, yes, on calling Marburg directly on, it actually happened to me, and I actually called them, and they're like, well, you need to call the city. I'm like, well, they're just going to call you. So it just didn't make any sense, so that's fantastic. Okay, so the project, this is the first hearing we've had since the issue of the concern about the coastal development line realization and delaying the whole project. And you mentioned it's going to take, and I see, thank you for being here, Mark and Leslie from the county. So we're hearing now maybe January, February, so basically a full year delay in getting the financing and the bonds. That's what you said, correct?
That's correct, about a year.
Okay. So and that's assuming that environmental review doesn't get any hiccups in the meantime. I'm making that assumption that the county has to come back, they have to do an amended plan, they have to go through their own environmental review, the Board of Supervisors has to approve that, and that no one, I mean, I know there's been concern about the project by outside groups, so if there's any concern there, that might delay it. It's possible it could be delayed further if there's a challenge to that, is my understanding. So, okay, so the question that first came up, and I'm glad Mr. Vincent's here, I'm not quite sure who to ask, is since this has come up, obviously over time there may have been activity happening in what we thought was not in the coastal zone that in fact is in the coastal zone. And I'm just wondering if that is something of concern that we should be concerned about as a city in terms of if there's any mitigation that's needed by the Coastal Commission and it's our trash if we're 40% of it. Are we going to be on the hook for any of that? I mean, it's all hypothetical, but I don't know if that conversation has happened. That's separate from the Resource Recovery Project, but I mean, it brings up the question. So, Mr. Vincent?
Well, Madam Mayor, members of council, I am not in a position to answer a question of whether or not there have been operations at Tahigas that were within the coastal zone and thought to be outside of the coastal zone. I think Mr. Schleich would be in a much better position to explain their operations at Tahigas.
Okay, and maybe Mr. Schleich, if you'll be able to, because I know this is all new information no one wanted to hear, but it is, and so let's, figure out what.
There you go.
Get some updates would be helpful, and thank you for being here today.
Madam Mayor, council members, we are moving quickly forward to redesign the project, and we are starting to get information from the contractor, both on the cost of construction changes, as well as the environmental impact. So we're on schedule to do that. I think your question had to do with maybe the history of the site.
It's more about this realization that the line of the coastal zone boundary was different than what had been previously thought of, and so over time, was there activity happening in the coastal zone without permits that it's just now coming to light, and is that a problem?
Madam Mayor, I don't know if I can answer that question because it gets really, really complicated really quickly. For example, the landfill was in place before the Coastal Development Act was approved. In fact, I think we were there probably before CEQA was required. So we get our permits from the Waste Board and the Water Board, and we've gotten all those permits. This ambiguity at this time, I don't know exactly how that would impact us or not.
Okay.
I can't answer the question.
No,
I'm sorry.
that's fair. That's fair. Thank you. So what's the tipping fee now?
So the tipping fee varies for the landfill. It's currently $87 per ton. It's different for green waste and for recyclables. Obviously, we're paying, but I think it's $48 for green waste. The idea is that all of those tipping fees would go up to $99 a ton, not just the landfill.
There's some component that goes from 87 to 99, and another that will go from 40 something to 99.
Right, that's correct.
Okay. So that was the original proposal, assuming the project and financing was going to happen this January, correct? If I'm remembering all the subcommittee meetings we were in. So, and that's why in my mind, it makes sense to delay that a year until we're ready and we know for sure that this project is all ready to go and the bonding will occur. So now we're hearing something different the proposal is to start this July anyway, to create this fund, which was supposed to be used when the bonds were going to be issued last January.
Right.
So I certainly have a problem with that, I guess, in terms of I would rather see everyone's ducks lined up in a row. The bonding issue happened. Yes, then of course we have to abide by our services agreement, but until that happens, I don't see why we would increase and use $1 million of reserves to increase our tipping fee.
Yeah, I want to make sure we characterize this appropriately. I don't think that the county is there yet. I mean, I think we've been going back and forth and discussing, is there value in keeping the tipping fees at $99 a ton for other potential reasons? We've been trying to work through some of those issues. So far, at least in our opinion, our humble opinion, we think it still makes sense, a lot of the other issues that may be in play, to wait a year, because we're essentially 1 year in delay, so we would be in the same place this coming January as we were this past January. But again, those conversations are still ongoing, and I'm not sure a final decision has been reached by the county one way or the other.
So, okay, so I will echo.
But I don't want to speak with Mr. Slyke. I mean,
Sure, no, I understand. I will echo your desire to wait a year. If the county says no, and I guess this is a legal question, no, we're gonna impose $99 a ton. Can we say no to that? We're not going to do it? Mr. Vincent?
Madam Mayor and Council, looking at the terms of the material deliveries agreement, we would need to have an amendment to that agreement to change the starting date of the new tipping fee. So the city's not in a position with the terms of the material delivery agreement right now to unilaterally say, we're not going to charge it. It has a deadline of July 1, 2017, and that is the term of the contract at this point.
And the amendment would be voted on by the council and the county, or just the city council?
Both parties of the agreement would have to agree.
Okay, so if there's a disagreement, then I guess that's the big question. If there is a disagreement, that we don't...
Yes. If there is a disagreement or the two parties do not agree to an amendment, then the original terms of the agreement remain in force.
So the agreement that this board, that this council voted on back in December, whatever that, November, because it was supposed to be connected to a project. The project is now delayed, but yet the portion of the funding is still in play according to this agreement. Was that sort of an oversight? Well, I guess no one expected that this project would be delayed, but it is.
Sure.
Okay.
Madam Mayor, members of council, the terms of the material delivery agreement have a set date for the increase of the tipping fees. There is a schedule within a separate agreement between the waste services contractor and the county that has a schedule of when the project will be built. Those two are related but are independent in the sense that the material delivery agreement specifies a particular date. The material delivery agreement did anticipate that this rate stabilization fund would be funded prior to the construction of the project and prior to the operations. So at this point, the county is still committed and is following through its obligations under the material delivery agreement. The city's obligations, the first one that makes a material change to city operations, kicks in on July 1, and right now that is where we are.
Okay.
If I could, Madam Mayor, I would just ask the question of the legal counsel: does a delay in the project represent a material change to the project enough that it would warrant sort of at least a consideration of whether that agreement is still in effect? I would just ask that question.
Mr. Palan?
Madam Mayor, yeah, let me invade on that one. This is a decision the council may have to make. It is mixed law and policy. I'd rather not give legal advice right now that would limit the council's options. So I think the question is really at this point a policy issue about whether we feel there is some harm to the city being caused by the now out of sequence payment and development of the project. So I'd rather not, like I say, advise in public on that right now.
Okay. Well, I would appreciate knowing more at the appropriate time. I know we have a 218 hearing on the 13th. Just from my view of this change, we're assuming that the project will continue and be funded in January. That's not a definite. I'm assuming everyone's assuming that's the case. We don't know. We're also assuming that the financing is going to remain the same. We really don't know that. So I think these are major questions, and I need some more info before I can say yes or no to that tipping fee. So thank you. Mr. White?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, I'm still not up to speed on what happened. So that's something that that's not appropriate for the budget hearing today, perhaps, but I'd sure like to get a focused update on, we got some stuff in the newspaper and maybe a staff memo went around, but I'm still not clear on where we are on the issue of what portion of the facility or the activity is in the coastal zone and how that's implicated. If clearly funding, lending, for example, issuing bonds in January of 18 is going to be a significant change from issuing bonds in this year. Rates are, in this morning's paper or yesterday's morning's paper, we're seeing yet another interest rate rise is in the works. Cost of construction, we're hearing about that, is rising significantly now. So there's going to be some increase in costs here, and so definitely some changes occurring. So I feel a little behind the curve on that whole issue. I'd appreciate being brought up to speed at some point. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Murillo?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. If I could go back to mattresses, I'm really pleased with what you presented today about that. And I just want to say that our West Side Community Group, our neighborhood association on the West Side, stands ready to do outreach with you. With Ms. Cruz Carpenter, we've been doing a lot of neighborhood cleanups, really good for everybody and good for us. It's just neat to be out there and feel so accomplished when we're done and taking big bags of trash and stuff is getting cleared away. So thank you for that. But one of the things that we do, Lorraine, as you know, is we go door to door during those cleanups with the hotline list. And so we're ready to do outreach with you. Thank you, Ms. Irely. Thank you. And welcome to the city. Thank you.
Mr. Dominguez?
So I want to go back to the tipping fees and what the city can do. I'd be interested in a closed session to discuss the options. So I don't know if that's something that the city attorney had already planned on or if there's a timeline.
Madam Mayor, Council Member, or Mayor Pro Tem Dominguez, we hadn't planned on that. I think if the council wants to consider initiating litigation, you can certainly conduct a closed session.
Okay, well, I would request that. And do you want it in the form of a motion and a vote today, or?
I don't need that. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
And my concern is as was indicated, a lot of fees and rates are going up, and it particularly hammers the working class because they have the least ability to ameliorate these fees. Wastewater, water, electricity, potentially sales tax. So these are all really adding up. So anything we can do to push off some of these would be great. And in a situation like this where I was worried, I thought in concept the project was a great idea, but the numbers didn't seem to pencil out then, and definitely now this is going to make the math even worse for us as a party. So I'd love to discuss our options as soon as possible.
Okay. Anything else on solid waste? All right. Thank you very much. And again, thank you, Mark and Leslie, for coming today.
Thank you.
We hope we can get to a resolution here. So, all right. We have all next week off. No council meetings, no budget hearings. So don't show up. But we do have our next budget hearing on the 7th in the morning. And so for now, we're adjourned. Thank you very much.